"Don't send me back to the mine," the boy sobbed. The rancher saw the mark on his hand and froze. The boy didn't wave for help. He threw himself in front of Gideon Hart's horse like he'd rather be trampled than turn back. Don't send me back to the mine," he sobbed, hands up, palms raw and shaking. Gideon leaned down to haul him out of the dust and froze. Burned into the boy's right hand was a fresh brand, a tiny crown over a pickaxe. The kind you didn't get by accident, the kind men got when somebody decided they belonged to the ground. Before we continue, tell us in the comments from what town you are watching this from. Gideon's mare snorted and sidestepped. The boy clung to Gideon's boot, breathing hard, eyes wide as coins in the failing light. He was all angles and coal dust, hair chopped uneven like it had been cut with a dull knife. One cheek was bruised yellow-green, his lips were split. "Easy," Gideon said, though his voice didn't sound easy. He kept staring at that mark as if it might change shape if he watched long enough. The crown, the pickaxe, a neat circle of blistered skin around it. The boy looked over his shoulder toward the hills. "They're coming." Gideon listened. Wind moved through dry grass. A distant coyote called once and went quiet. Then, faint as a bad thought, came the rhythm of hooves on hard pan, more than one horse, moving fast, not caring who heard. Gideon's hand went to the rifle scabbard without him meaning it to. His fingers stopped halfway. A shootout out here would paint the trail red and still end with the kid dragged back. Gideon wasn't a lawman, he wasn't a hero. He was a rancher with fences to mend and cattle to count, and a life built on staying out of other men's storms. But that mark on the boy's hand wasn't just a bruise. It was a claim. "What's your name?" Gideon asked. The boy swallowed, throat working like it hurt. "Tommy." "Tommy what?" Tommy's eyes darted again to the hills. "Tommy Kellen." "Please, mister, please." The hoofbeats grew louder, now a steady drum. Gideon swung down from the saddle in one motion and caught the boy by the shoulders. Under the grime he felt bones, too light for his age. "How old are you?" 13, Tommy said, too quick. Gideon didn't believe him. The boy had the narrow chest and soft jaw of 11, maybe 10 if he'd been starved a while. "Where's the mine?" Gideon asked. Tommy's mouth opened, then closed, like saying it was dangerous, like even the name could reach out and grab him. "The Silver Crown," he whispered. Gideon's stomach tightened. Silver Crown. People in town spoke that name the way they spoke of drought or fever, something that happened to other folks, unless it happened to you. A mine up in the Black Hills where men went to get rich and came back with lungs like torn cloth, where the owner, Silas Crane, bought the sheriff's smile and the judge's pen. Gideon looked at the boy again, at the brand, at the raw fingers curled like claws. "You ran from Crane's men?" Tommy nodded so hard his chin trembled. "I didn't mean to steal nothing. I just—" His voice cracked. "They said my debt wasn't paid. They said it never would be." "Debt," Gideon repeated, tasting the word like rust. A sharp whistle carried on the wind, human, close enough to raise the hair on Gideon's arms. Then a voice, muffled by distance but not by doubt. "Hey, you there!" Gideon didn't answer. He grabbed Tommy under one arm, lifted him like a sack of grain, and shoved him up toward the saddle. Tommy flinched when Gideon's hand brushed the branded palm. "Hold on," Gideon said. Tommy clamped both arms around the saddle horn, face pressed to the mare's neck. Gideon mounted behind him, turned the horse off the trail, and drove her into the scrub. The hoofbeats behind them surged, angry now. Whoever was coming had seen the movement. Gideon chose the low ground where brush hid tracks. The land dipped into a shallow wash, then rose toward a line of mesquite that opened into his fence country. If he could make the creek bed, they might lose the trail in the stones. Tommy's breath came in little panicked hitches. "They got guns." "So do I," Gideon said, and wished the words felt true. His rifle was real, yes, but so was the fact he hadn't shot at a man in years. Ranchers shot coyotes, not riders. Gideon kept his eyes forward and made choices fast, left around a boulder that would block sightlines, down into the wash where hoofprints blurred. Behind them a gun cracked, one shot not meant to hit, meant to warn. A second later another shot. Dust jumped near the mare's hind legs. Tommy let out a strangled sound. Gideon leaned forward, voice hard. "Don't scream! Hold tight!" He dug his heels in. The mare leapt, muscles bunching, and they tore down the wash. Gideon heard riders splitting, trying to flank. He didn't look back. Looking back was how you got dead. The wash narrowed. Stones kicked under hooves. The mare slipped once and recovered, snorting. Gideon's teeth clacked as they bounced. Tommy's head rocked against Gideon's chest like a child trying not to cry. Another shot. Closer. A bullet whined off a rock and sang into the dusk. Gideon saw the creek bed ahead, dry this time of year but packed with stone. He swung the mare down into it and let her run. Tracks on stone were harder to read. Still readable, but harder. Every second mattered. They barreled through and climbed the far bank, pushing into sage and rabbit brush. Gideon's ranch fence lay a mile ahead if the world stayed honest. He kept low, keeping to the shallow folds in the land. Tommy twisted in the saddle, trying to see. Gideon caught the boy's shoulder and held him steady. "Look forward." "I can't go back," Tommy whispered like a prayer. "I can't. Gideon's jaw tightened. "Don't talk." "Save your breath." They crested a small rise, and there it was. Gideon's land. The familiar spread of open pasture with his fence lines like scars across it. His cabin sat low near a stand of cottonwoods, roof dark against the last smear of sunlight. The barn beside it was a squat shadow. Smoke rose thin from the chimney. Gideon had banked the stove that morning. The sight of home should have steadied him. Instead, it felt like bringing a lightning storm into dry hay. A rider appeared behind them on the ridge they'd just crossed, silhouetted against the fading sky. Then another. Then another. They were spread out now, hunting. Gideon swore under his breath and angled hard toward the cottonwoods. The mare's hooves thudded across his pasture. If they followed, they'd be on his land with guns and intent, and the law would smile and call it business. He reached his fence and didn't bother for a gate. He drove the mare straight at the top strand, and the animal jumped, clearing it with Tommy clinging like a burr. Gideon felt the wire sing from the near miss. They hit the ground running, and Gideon pushed them on toward the barn. The cabin door was shut. The windows were dark. Good. No curious eyes, no witness but the wind. At the barn, Gideon slid off, grabbed Tommy by the waist and lifted him down. Tommy nearly collapsed as soon as his feet hit dirt. Gideon caught him before he fell, surprised by how light he was. "Inside," Gideon said. Tommy stumbled after him, limping. Gideon yanked open the barn door and shoved the boy into the cool, animal-scented dark. He led him past stalls, past a hanging harness, to the ladder that climbed into the loft. "Up!" Gideon ordered. Tommy started, then hesitated, eyes darting around. "What if? You want to live?" Gideon snapped. "Up!" Tommy climbed. Gideon followed, one hand on the ladder, the other on the rifle now. In the loft, he pushed aside a folded tarp and pointed to a shadowed corner behind stacked feed sacks. "Get in there. Don't move. Don't make noise. If you hear somebody below, you breathe through your nose and you pray you ain't got a cough." Tommy crawled in, trembling. Gideon's lantern light caught the boy's branded hand as he tucked it under his chest, like he could hide it from God. Gideon set a canteen beside him. "Drink small." Tommy grabbed it and drank too fast anyway, water spilling down his chin. Gideon watched the boy's throat move, watched his eyes close for half a second, like water was the closest thing to mercy he'd felt in months. "You got family?" Gideon asked. Tommy froze, then shook his head once. Not here." Gideon didn't press. He couldn't afford to. He turned and descended the ladder, boots quiet on the rungs. Below, the barn felt too open, too full of hiding places for other men. He closed the door and slid the bolt. That wouldn't stop anyone determined, but it would slow them. Gideon crossed to the cabin at a fast walk that wasn't quite a run. His hand stayed on the rifle. The other hand reached for his revolver as he went up the porch steps. Inside, the cabin smelled of coffee grounds and smoke and old wood. Gideon shut the door behind him and listened. Hooves. Closer now. The riders had crossed his fence line. He heard them because his land was quiet. Quiet was the only thing he truly owned. He moved to the window, pulled the curtain back a finger's width, and looked out. 3 riders spread across his pasture, moving toward the barn like they knew exactly where to go. One carried a lantern low. Another had a rifle across his saddle. The third rode a little ahead, like he owned the air. Gideon's heart beat slow and hard. He could shoot from the window. He could drop one, maybe 2. Then what? A dead man didn't keep a boy safe. A dead rancher didn't keep a ranch. He stepped back from the window and went to the table. On it lay his ledger, his pencil, a tin plate from breakfast. Ordinary things. He stared at them and felt the world tilt, as if ordinary was a luxury he'd just lost. Another shot cracked outside, not at him, just into the air. The kind of shot men fired when they wanted you to come out and talk. A voice followed, closer, smooth, practiced. "Rancher, we ain't here to cause trouble." Gideon's jaw clenched at the lie. He glanced toward the wall where his hat hung. He took it, put it on, and felt something settle in him. Not calm, exactly, but a decision. He opened the door and stepped onto the porch, keeping the rifle low but visible. The dusk air was cold enough to sting his lungs. The lead rider stopped at the edge of the yard and dismounted like he had all the time in the world. He wore a clean coat, too clean for a man hunting across open range. His boots were polished, his mustache was trimmed, even his gloves looked new. He smiled up at Gideon as if they were meeting over a fence line to talk cattle prices. "Evening," the man called. "Name's Rourke. I work for Mr. Crane." Gideon didn't answer right away. He let silence hang until it became uncomfortable on purpose. Rourke's smile didn't move. "We're looking for a runaway. Little fella, dirty. Might have wandered onto your land." Gideon stared at him. "You riding onto a man's property in the dark, firing guns, calling it wandering?" Rourke held his hands out slightly. "No disrespect meant. We got a situation. That boy belongs to the mine. He's under contract." "A child," Gideon said. "A worker," Rourke corrected, still smiling, and the smile was the worst part. "Debt don't care about age, neither does rock." Gideon felt his fingers tighten on the rifle stock. "You got papers?" Rourke patted his coat. "We got papers, sure, but we don't need to wave 'em around in the dirt. Mr. Crane's on good terms with the sheriff, the judge too. Makes things easy for honest men." "Honest," Gideon said, and it came out flat. Behind Rourke, one of the other riders shifted, eyeing the barn. Lantern light bobbed. Gideon watched it like it was a snake's head. Rourke followed Gideon's gaze and chuckled softly. "Now, I don't want to search your place. That'd be impolite. I'd rather you do the neighborly thing and tell me if the boy passed through." "He didn't," Gideon said. Rourke blinked once, slow. "You sure about that?" Gideon held his stare. "I'm sure." For the first time, Rourke's smile thinned, not disappearing but tightening like a rope being pulled. "Rancher, I'm going to speak plain. That boy stole property. If we take him back quiet, nobody has to know you ever saw him. If we have to drag him out, it gets messy. Men get hurt, animals get shot, barns catch fire." The air seemed to drop 10 degrees. Gideon's mouth went dry. He thought of the loft, the feed sacks, a thin boy breathing through his nose, trying not to make sound. "You threatening me on my porch?" Gideon asked. "I'm advising you," Rourke said. "Mr. Crane doesn't like trouble, but he dislikes losing what's his even more." Gideon's eyes flicked to the edges of the yard, more movement than before. Shadows between cottonwoods, not just 3 men, at least 5, maybe more, spread wide. They hadn't come to ask, they'd come to take. Rourke took a step closer. "Last chance, friend. Where's the boy?" Gideon felt something cold in his chest, not fear. Something older, something that recognized the shape of this moment. Men like Rourke didn't stop at one boy. They stopped when nobody stopped them. He lifted the rifle a little, not aiming at Rourke's face, but enough to change the conversation. "Get off my land." Rourke stared at the rifle, then back at Gideon. The polite mask was still there, but his eyes hardened. "You sure you want to do this?" Rourke asked softly. Gideon didn't blink. "Leave." For a heartbeat, the world held still. Even the horses quieted, ears forward. Gideon could hear his own breathing, steady and loud in his head. Rourke's hand drifted toward his holster like it had a mind of its own. "All right," he said, voice calm as Sunday. "If that's how you want it." Behind him, a rider raised the lantern higher, casting light across Gideon's yard and across the cabin wall until it found the barn door and settled there like a verdict. Rourke turned his head slightly, not taking his eyes off Gideon. "Check the barn." Gideon's pulse kicked. A man moved toward the barn at a quick walk, boots crunching gravel. Gideon shifted, stepping off the porch, rifle coming up. And from inside the barn, above the stalls, a single dry cough cracked the silence like a twig snapping under a boot. The cough came again, thin, dry, the kind a body makes when it has been breathing rock dust instead of air. Gideon didn't move for half a heartbeat. Rourke did. His eyes flicked toward the barn, and the smile he'd been wearing finally slipped, just enough to show what lived underneath. "There," Rourke said softly, like he was confirming the weather. The man with the lantern started toward the barn. Gideon stepped off the porch and swung the rifle up, not aiming at the man's chest but putting the barrel in his path. "Stop!" Lantern light trembled across the yard. The runner slowed, boots scraping gravel. Behind him, the other riders shifted in their saddles, hands dropping toward leather and steel. Rourke spread his hands as if Gideon was the unreasonable one. "Could be a sick horse, I guess." "It's my barn," Gideon said. "You don't step inside it." Rourke's voice stayed smooth. "We don't have to search. You can just tell me where the boy is." Gideon held the rifle steady. He could feel his pulse in his throat. Up in the loft, Tommy was probably biting his own tongue to keep quiet. One cough had been enough. "You want to talk," Gideon said. "You get back on your horse and you ride off my land." Rourke nodded once, almost politely. Then he turned his head a fraction, speaking to his men without looking away from Gideon. "Take the rifle off him." The words landed like a rock. Two riders peeled wide, angling toward the yard. Another man headed for the barn again, slower now, confident. Gideon fired once into the dirt in front of the man's boot. Dust jumped. The man jerked back, cursing. Horses snorted and danced. Silence snapped tight. Rourke exhaled through his nose like he was disappointed in a child. "All right," he said. "That's how you want it." He lifted his chin, a small, casual signal. Then everything moved. One rider spurred toward the cabin to cut Gideon off. Another rushed the barn with the lantern swinging. The two men closing on Gideon came faster. Gideon aimed low and fired again, not at flesh. He shot the lantern out of the runner's hand. Glass burst, flame died, and the yard dropped darker, the smell of kerosene sharp in the air. The runner shouted and went for his pistol. Gideon swung the rifle toward Rourke, but a shot cracked from the side and tore a splinter from the porch rail near Gideon's elbow. They were done talking. Gideon pivoted and lunged back inside the cabin, slamming the door. Another bullet thudded into wood. The window glass shivered. He didn't stand there. He moved. The cabin had two exits. Most men only saw the front. Gideon crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed a canvas coat from a peg, and yanked open the back door. Cold air hit him. He dropped low and moved along the cabin's shadow toward the cottonwoods. From the front, Rourke's voice carried, sharper now. "He's running! Barn, get that door!" Gideon cut through branches and reached the barn's back wall where it met the trees. He found the loose plank he'd left loose on purpose, pried it open just enough, and slipped inside. The barn was a dark box of smells: hay, leather, sweat, old manure, and the warm breath of animals that didn't understand men. Above, in the loft, a faint rustle. "Tommy," Gideon hissed, not loud enough to carry. A head appeared between sacks, eyes huge. "They're here," Tommy whispered. "I know." Gideon climbed the ladder fast and caught the boy by the shoulder. Under the grime, Tommy felt like bone and wire. In the dim light, Gideon saw the brand again on the boy's palm. The blistered circle around it was fresh. Someone had pressed iron into skin on purpose, then sent him back underground. "Did they do that today?" Gideon asked. Tommy swallowed, eyes darting. "When I asked to leave, they said the mark means I can't run again." Outside, wood groaned. A heavy blow hit the barn doors. Then another. Gideon forced his voice down to a whisper. "You listen to me. We're leaving. You do exactly what I say and you don't stop for anything." Tommy nodded, lips pressed tight. Near the roofline was a narrow hatch Gideon used to pull hay up without opening the big doors. He shoved it. It stuck. He shoved again, harder, and it scraped open with a dry groan that sounded too loud. Tommy flinched. "Out!" Gideon breathed. Tommy crawled through, palms sliding on wood. Gideon followed, rifle first, boots searching for purchase on the outer ledge. Outside, the air was colder and cleaner. The yard below was chaos in broken pieces, hoofbeats, men shouting, horses snorting. Lantern light bobbed near the cabin porch. Another light moved toward the barn's front. Somebody yelled, "Kerosene!" Gideon saw a man with a can moving toward the barn wall. If they couldn't pull Tommy out, they'd smoke him out, or burn the whole place and call it an accident. Gideon's teeth ground. He guided Tommy along the barn's roof edge toward the back corner where the cottonwoods thickened. "Don't look down," Gideon murmured. "Just follow." They reached the corner. Gideon dropped first, catching the roof edge and letting himself hang. He landed on bent knees in the soft dirt by the trees. He held his arms up. "Jump to me." Tommy stared down, fear locking him. His branded hand trembled on the board. "They'll take me," Tommy whispered. "Not if you jump," Gideon said. "Now." Tommy jumped. Gideon caught him, barely, Tommy's bony weight slamming into his chest. Gideon staggered back into the cottonwoods, branches snagging his coat. Behind them, the barn doors finally gave with a crack that echoed off the trees. Shouts erupted. "Loft's empty," another voice answered, closer. "Check the roof." A lantern beam swept up, catching the open hatch for a blink before Gideon dragged Tommy deeper into the dark. Gunfire snapped. A bullet smacked into a trunk above Gideon's head, showering bark. Tommy made a strangled sound and clamped his mouth shut. Gideon hauled him through the trees toward the wash where he kept a spare horse tied low for emergencies. The bay lifted its head and blew, whites showing. "Up," Gideon ordered. Tommy looked at the saddle like it was a cliff. Gideon lifted him and shoved him into it, then swung up behind him. The bay danced, nervous. "Easy," Gideon breathed into the horse's neck. Then he dug his heels in and sent it down the wash. They tore along stone and shadow. Behind them, lanterns moved along the banks like hunting lights. Hoofbeats dropped into the wash, gaining. A shot cracked. Dirt jumped near the bay's hind legs. Tommy flinched so hard Gideon felt it through the saddle. "I can't go back," he whispered. "I heard you the first time," Gideon said, voice rough. "Hold on." They hit a bend where the wash narrowed between rocks. Gideon kept them in the deepest shadow, following turns that would break line of sight. But the riders knew his land now. More lanterns appeared on the high bank, fanning out. Rourke's voice carried again, too close. "You can run all night, Hart." Gideon's spine stiffened. He hadn't told that man his name, not once. Tommy twisted to look back and Gideon grabbed his shoulder. "Forward," Tommy swallowed. "At the mine, they have a book with names. I saw it when I cleaned the office. Your name was in it." Gideon's hands tightened on the reins. "What did you say?" Tommy shook his head quickly, as if afraid of being punished for speaking. "Maybe not you. Maybe Hart. Just Hart." Gideon felt cold spread under his ribs. He kept his eyes ahead. "Don't talk about it now." A rider cut across in front, trying to block the wash where it opened into the lower pasture. Gideon saw the silhouette, rifle raised. He didn't slow. He angled hard for a narrow gap between boulders. "Down," Gideon said. Tommy ducked. Gideon fired once on the move. The shot sparked off rock near the rider's horse. The horse spooked sideways and the gap opened just enough. They drove through. Moonlight flashed on open grass for a breath, too exposed. Then Gideon swung them toward broken ground where scrub would hide them. The bay's breathing went rough, foam flecking its bit. Another shot cracked. The horse jerked hard. Gideon felt it stumble, recover, then stumble again. Ahead was the cut that led into a ravine, only a few yards more. If they made it, the land dropped sharp and sightlines died. Loose gravel slid under the bay's front hoof. The animal's weight shifted wrong. "Hold on!" Gideon shouted. The horse went down. Noise, dirt, impact. Gideon felt his shoulder slam ground. He rolled with Tommy by instinct, taking the worst of it. The rifle flew from his hand and clattered away into darkness. Tommy hit hard, breath knocked out. A thin wail tried to come out and got stuck. Hoofbeats pounded closer, loud now. Lantern light spilled over the ridge. Gideon shoved up, dizzy, and yanked Tommy upright. The boy's leg buckled. Blood darkened his pant near the shin. "Get up!" Gideon hissed. The bay scrambled, then got its feet under it, swaying, a dark, wet patch on its flank. A rifle shot cracked so close, Gideon felt it in his teeth. Rock burst near his head. "That's far enough," Rourke called. Gideon turned. Rourke sat his horse at the top of the rise, lantern held high in one hand, rifle leveled with the other. Behind him, men spread out in a half circle, closing slow as a noose. Their horses steamed in the cold. Their faces were hard to see, but their intent wasn't. In the lantern glow, Tommy's branded hand showed plain against Gideon's coat. Rourke's thin smile returned. There he is. One rider dismounted and started down with a coil of rope. Another carried something long and dark, an iron bar or maybe a branding tool wrapped in cloth. Gideon lifted his empty hands a fraction, just enough to show he wasn't reaching for the rifle he no longer had. His revolver was still at his hip, but if he went for it, Tommy would take the bullet. "You got no right," Gideon said. Rourke clicked his tongue. "Right? Mr. Crane owns the right. The sheriff signs it. The judge stamps it. You want to argue, you can do it in town, after we put the boy back where he belongs." Tommy's breath hitched. "Please," he whispered, not to them, to Gideon. Gideon felt the boy trembling beside him. He looked at the ravine mouth a few steps behind, so close it hurt, then at the men fanning out. "You said contract," Gideon said. "How much is his debt?" Rourke laughed once, short and mean. "It's not money, it's rock, it's years. It's until Mr. Crane says it's done." Gideon swallowed a surge of anger that threatened to make him stupid. "He's a kid." "He's marked," Rourke said, and the way he said it made Gideon's skin crawl. "That mark means he runs. We cut him off from the world. You want to keep him? You can't. You'll just get yourself buried with him." The rider with the rope came closer. Gideon saw his gloved hand tighten, and the glove rode up just enough to show a pale scar under the wrist, the ghost of an old burn. Not fresh like Tommy's. Old, like it had healed years ago. Gideon's eyes locked on it before he could stop himself. Rourke noticed. His smile sharpened. "You recognize it, don't you?" Gideon's throat went dry. Rourke leaned forward in the saddle, lantern light turning his face into hard angles. "I asked you nice. Now I'm telling you." He lifted the rifle a hair. Gideon tightened his grip on Tommy's arm and took one step back toward the ravine mouth. Rourke's voice snapped, "Don't!" The rifle barrel dipped, off Gideon, onto the boy. Tommy went still, eyes locked on the dark circle at the end of the gun. Tommy's blood ran warm down Gideon's knuckles. Rourke's finger tightened on the trigger, slow and certain, like he had all the time in the world to choose where the hole would be. Gideon felt the night narrow to that single point of steel. Gideon didn't draw, not because he didn't want to, because he did. His hand itched to snap down, clear leather, put lead into Rourke's teeth and be done with it. But the rifle wasn't on Gideon anymore. It was on Tommy. And Rourke's eyes said he'd pull the trigger just to prove he could. The rope man took another step. Tommy's breath came in tiny, quiet pulls, like he was trying not to exist. Gideon lifted one hand slowly, palm out. "Easy," he said, but it wasn't for Rourke. It was for the boy. "Don't move." Rourke's finger rested on the trigger like a promise. "You're learning." Gideon swallowed. He forced his gaze off the rifle barrel and onto Rourke's face. "What do you want?" Rourke's smile stayed thin. "The boy." "No," Gideon said. Rourke shrugged as if Gideon had refused a handshake. "Then I'll take him." The rope man lunged. Gideon moved. He grabbed Tommy by the collar and spun him hard to the left, away from the line of fire, while his other hand snapped to his revolver. The shot came anyway. A crack that tore the air open. Dirt burst where Tommy had been standing. Gideon fired back without aiming for a chest. He aimed for a horse. The round hit somewhere low. The animal screamed and reared, throwing its rider sideways. In the same heartbeat, Gideon shoved Tommy backward into the ravine mouth. "Run!" he barked. Tommy didn't run. He stumbled, leg buckling, and Gideon caught him, half carrying him as they plunged into the cut. The ground dropped steep. Loose rock rolled under their boots. Above, men shouted. Hooves skidded. Another shot cracked, the sound bouncing off stone. Gideon dragged Tommy down into the ravine's shadow where the lantern light thinned. The walls tightened, high enough to swallow them. The air smelled of damp earth and old leaves. Tommy gasped. "My leg!" "I know," Gideon said. He yanked the boy along anyway, following the ravine's curve. His shoulder throbbed from the fall. Blood ran warm somewhere under his sleeve. He ignored it. Behind them, lantern light spilled into the cut like poured milk. Shapes appeared at the rim. "Down there!" someone yelled. A rifle flashed. Stone chipped above Gideon's head. Gideon pulled Tommy into a shallow hollow beneath an overhang. He pressed the boy flat and threw his own body over him for a beat, listening to shots crack overhead. "Stay down," Gideon breathed into Tommy's ear. "Stay down no matter what you hear." Tommy's hands were shaking so hard his fingers clicked against stone. His branded palm scraped dirt, and the boy winced like the mark itself hurt deeper than skin. Gideon peeked out. Rourke's men were climbing down carefully now, slower without their horses. Lanterns bobbed, their voices echoed. "They can't go far," Rourke called from above, calm as ever. "Boy's hurt." Gideon's jaw tightened. He hadn't said it. They'd seen it. He looked at Tommy's shin. A jagged rock had split the fabric. Blood seeped steadily, not pouring, but enough to weaken him. If Gideon didn't stop it, Tommy wouldn't make it a mile. Gideon tore a strip from his own shirt sleeve and wrapped it around the boy's leg, cinching it tight. Tommy sucked in air through his teeth. "They'll kill you." "They'll try," Gideon said. "You should let me go." Gideon stared at him. "You think they'll be gentle because you go quiet?" Tommy's eyes darted toward the approaching lanterns. "At least you'd live." Gideon almost laughed, dry, humorless. "You don't know much about men like that." He finished the knot, then grabbed Tommy under the arm. "We move. On my count." Tommy's face was pale under the coal dust. He nodded anyway. Gideon waited until a lantern swung past the hollow. Then he shoved Tommy forward, and they limped deeper into the ravine. They moved like ghosts, but ghosts made noise. Gravel slid, branches snapped. Gideon kept one hand on the revolver, the other hooked around Tommy's ribs, half carrying him. The ravine widened into a dry creek bed, choked with fallen limbs. Gideon knew this place. He'd hunted deer here once, years ago. There was a side cut that climbed into brush thick enough to hide a man. He angled them toward it, a lantern flare behind them. "I hear him!" Rourke's voice again, nearer now. "Spread out! Don't shoot the boy unless you have to." That sentence made Gideon's stomach roll, "unless you have to," like it was a tool choice. They reached the side cut. Gideon shoved Tommy into it first. The incline was steep. Tommy slipped, caught himself with his hands, and Gideon saw the brand smear with dirt. The crown over the pickaxe looked even more like ownership, with mud ground into it. Gideon climbed after him, boots digging. At the top, brush swallowed them. Gideon pushed through thorns, dragging Tommy by the coat. They emerged into open scrub on the far side, wind cutting cold. He spotted movement ahead, his injured bay horse, limping through sage, head low. It hadn't run far. Gideon whistled once, sharp. The horse lifted its head and stumbled toward him. Dark blood stained its flank. Not a killing wound, but enough to slow it. Gideon cursed under his breath. He couldn't outrun mounted men on foot, and he couldn't outrun them on a wounded horse either. But he could disappear if he got to town first and found someone who still answered to something other than Crane. He shoved Tommy toward the horse. "Up!" Tommy stared at the saddle like it was too high. Gideon grabbed him and lifted him onto it. Tommy cried out as his leg bent, then bit it back. Gideon swung up behind him. They moved at a limping canter through scrub and low hills, taking every fold of land Gideon could find. Lantern light behind them flickered, then vanished. The men had lost direct sight, but they wouldn't stop. They'd circle until morning if they had to. Tommy leaned back against Gideon, small and shaking. Why did you shoot for the horse?" "Because men heal slower than horses," Gideon said, "and horses panic." Tommy didn't answer. His breathing was ragged. They crested a rise and the town lights came into view in the distance, small, scattered lanterns and window glow, like a handful of fireflies caught in a jar. Gideon's jaw tightened again. Town meant people. People meant law. Law meant the sheriff, and the sheriff meant Crane. But Gideon had no other direction left. They descended toward the road. Halfway down, a figure stepped out from behind a boulder and raised a rifle. Gideon hauled the reins, stopping hard. The bay snorted and danced, nearly throwing Tommy. The figure didn't fire. A familiar voice called out, "Hart!" Gideon recognized it at once. Not Rourke, rougher, older. Sheriff Hollis stepped into the thin moonlight, coat unbuttoned, badge catching a dull gleam. 2 deputies stood behind him, rifles ready. A third man sat on a horse a little back, face hidden under a hat brim. Hollis's eyes went straight to Tommy, straight to the brand. "Well," Hollis said, almost bored. "You've been busy." Gideon didn't lower his gun. "Get off the road, Sheriff." Hollis made a small, tired sound like a sigh. "You know I can't. Mr. Crane sent word, said you were harboring stolen property." "He's a child." Hollis's gaze flicked to Gideon's face. "Doesn't matter what he is, matters what he signed." "He didn't sign anything," Hollis shrugged. "Maybe his daddy did, maybe a judge did, maybe the world did. Don't make me argue philosophy out here." Tommy stiffened in front of Gideon. Don't, please, he started. Hollis cut him off without even looking at him. Quiet. The word landed like a slap. Tommy shut his mouth, trembling. Gideon stared at Hollis, feeling something harden behind his ribs. You're going to hand him over. Hollis spread his hands. It's what I'm paid for. You're paid by Crane. Hollis's eyes narrowed. Careful. Gideon's gaze slid past Hollis to the man on the horse behind him. The hat brim hid most of the face, but Gideon saw the posture, relaxed, confident, like the whole road belonged to him. That wasn't a deputy. That was mind muscle. The man tipped his head just enough for moonlight to catch his mustache. Rourke. He'd gotten ahead of them without Gideon seeing. He'd used the sheriff like a gate. Rourke's voice carried, calm and pleased. Evening again, Hart? Gideon's grip tightened on the revolver. The bay horse shifted under them, injured and tired. Hollis spoke without turning. You should have stayed on your ranch, Gideon. Would have been simpler. Gideon's eyes flicked to Tommy's face in front of him. The boy was staring at the sheriff's badge like it was a knife. Gideon leaned down to Tommy's ear, barely moving his lips. When I tell you, you slide off the far side and run for that ditch, Tommy whispered back, almost soundless. They'll shoot me. They might, Gideon breathed, but they'll definitely take you if you don't move. Tommy's branded hand clenched into a fist. Hollis raised his chin. Last warning, hand him down, nice and easy. Gideon didn't answer. He looked at the ditch line, 10 yards, brush beyond it, maybe cover. If Tommy could crawl, Rourke interrupted, voice low and sharp. Don't get creative, Hart. I already told you what happens. And then, like he'd been waiting for that exact moment, Rourke lifted a folded cloth in his hand, something wrapped inside it. He unrolled it just enough for Gideon to see the end of a branding iron, dark metal shaped like a crown over a pickaxe. Tommy made a small choking sound. Rourke smiled at the sound. We can make it fresh again. Gideon felt the night tilt. His vision narrowed. The iron in Rourke's hand looked too familiar, like a memory dug up from dirt. And without thinking, without choosing, Gideon's left hand drifted toward his own palm, where a glove-covered skin he never showed anybody. Hollis noticed. Rourke noticed too. Rourke's eyes sharpened like he'd just found the answer to a question he'd been carrying for years. Well, I'll be damned, he murmured. It's you. Rourke's smile didn't widen. It sharpened like a blade finally finding the right angle. It's you, he said again, quieter, and that quiet was worse than shouting. I knew I'd seen that look somewhere. Thought you were dead. Gideon's fingers stopped against the edge of his glove. He forced his hand away, made it hang loose at his side like it meant nothing, like his skin didn't suddenly feel too tight. Sheriff Hollis looked between them, annoyed now. What are you talking about? Rourke didn't take his eyes off Gideon. Our rancher here ain't just a rancher. Gideon tasted blood where his teeth dug into his cheek. He kept his voice level. Move off the road, Hollis. Hollis chuckled. You're in no position to give orders. Tommy shifted in front of Gideon, shaking so hard the saddle creaked. Gideon could feel every tremor through the horse. Rourke raised the branding iron a little higher, letting moonlight lick its edge. You remember this, don't you? Silver crown, crown over pickaxe. We only press it into people that owe. Tommy whispered, Don't. Rourke's eyes flicked to the boy for a heartbeat, pleased to see fear, then returned to Gideon. Funny thing. I've seen men scream when this touches them. Big men, mean men, men who swore they'd never beg. Gideon's grip tightened on his revolver until the wood bit his palm. Hollis's patience snapped. Enough. Gideon, you're done. Hand the boy down. Gideon stared at the ditch line, at the scrub beyond it, and then at the 3 rifles pointed his way. Even if he sent Tommy running, a bullet would catch him. Hollis didn't care. Rourke might even enjoy it. So Gideon changed the question. He looked at Hollis. You got a warrant? Hollis scoffed. I don't need one. Mine's got a contract. Show me, Gideon said. If it's law, show me. Hollis hesitated, eyes narrowing. He didn't carry papers on night roads. He carried force. Rourke laughed softly. You hear him? Still thinks paper matters. It does, Gideon said, and his voice cut sharper than he intended. Even to men like you. Rourke leaned forward in the saddle. Paper matters when it's clean. That boy's paper is signed in blood and coal dust. Tommy's branded hand slid onto Gideon's thigh, gripping fabric like a lifeline. Gideon glanced down. The boy's fingers were black under the nails, cracked at the joints. A child's hand turned into a miner's tool. Gideon's throat tightened. He looked up at Hollis again. You want him? Fine. But you'll take him in town, in front of folks. Hollis's eyes narrowed. Why? Because, Gideon said, I want witnesses when you drag a child back to the mine. Rourke's mouth twitched. You think folks'll stop it? No, Gideon said, but they'll see it. Hollis shifted, discomfort creeping in. He didn't like eyes. He liked empty roads and quiet deals. Rourke's voice turned colder. We ain't parading nothing. We take what's ours and we go. Gideon felt the opening. It was narrow. It was ugly. It was all he had. He let his shoulders drop a fraction, like he was giving in. He loosened his grip on the revolver just enough to look less like a man about to shoot. All right, Gideon said. All right, don't do anything stupid. Tommy jerked, head snapping back. No. Gideon pressed his knee against Tommy's calf, a warning, and whispered through barely moving lips. When I lift you down, you go limp. You hear me? Like you fainted. Tommy's breath hitched. They'll go limp, Gideon repeated. Trust me. Trust wasn't something Gideon asked for. It tasted wrong. But Tommy's body trembled once, then stilled a little. A tiny nod. Gideon raised both hands slowly and holstered the revolver with deliberate care, making sure everyone saw it. He spoke to Hollis like he was surrendering. I'll hand him down. Hollis's shoulders eased. Deputies stepped forward, confident now. Rourke didn't ease at all. His gaze stayed fixed, hungry, like he was watching a game and already knew the ending. Gideon slid one arm around Tommy's waist. Easy, he murmured. Tommy's eyes were wet, shining in moonlight. Please, he whispered, but he didn't fight. Gideon lifted him down from the saddle, and Tommy went limp the second his boots touched dirt, collapsing in Gideon's arms like his bones had dissolved. One deputy laughed. Boy's about to wet himself. Hollis stepped closer, reaching out. Give him here. Gideon shifted his stance, turning his body just enough so Tommy's weight shielded Gideon's hands. I told you he's hurt, Gideon said. He needs... Rourke barked. Don't dally. Hollis grabbed for Tommy's shoulder. Gideon let Hollis take some of the weight, and in the same motion drove his forehead forward. The headbutt landed square on Hollis's nose with a wet crack. Hollis reeled back, cursing, hands flying up. His badge flashed, then vanished as he stumbled. At the same instant, Tommy, no longer limp, twisted out of Gideon's hold and dropped hard to the ground, rolling toward the ditch line exactly as Gideon had whispered. The deputies shouted. Rifles came up. Gideon moved faster than thought. He snatched his revolver free, spun, and fired twice into the dirt in front of the deputies' boots, forcing them to flinch back. Down! He roared at Tommy. Tommy crawled, dragging his bad leg, arms digging into the dust. Rourke raised his rifle and aimed, not at Gideon, at the boy. Gideon saw it and felt the world slow to a crawl. He threw himself sideways, firing as he fell. His bullet hit Rourke's lantern, exploding it into glass and flame. Darkness slammed down. For a heartbeat, nobody could see. But bullets didn't need light. They needed direction. A shot cracked. Tommy screamed, a short, sharp sound, and went still. Gideon's heart stopped. Tommy! Gideon shouted, scrambling toward the ditch, hands out, blind in the dark. Another shot, closer. Dirt smacked his face. Gideon dropped flat, crawling, reaching. His fingers touched cloth. Warmth. Breath. Tommy jerked. I'm here, he gasped. It hit. My arm. Gideon's lungs flooded with air again. Not relief. Rage. He grabbed Tommy by the collar and hauled him into the ditch, into brush thick enough to hide a man if luck held. Above them, Hollis was screaming orders through blood. Light! Get a light! Rourke's voice cut through, furious now. Find them! They can't be far! Gideon pressed Tommy deeper into the weeds. The boy's breathing rasped. Blood soaked his sleeve. Gideon's mind worked like a trap snapping shut. Town was ahead, the doctor's office, the church. People who might look away, but might not if a wounded child stumbled into their street. He leaned into Tommy's ear, voice iron. Can you run? Tommy shook his head, teeth chattering. I can try. You don't have to run, Gideon whispered. You just have to hold on. He looked up through the brush. Shapes moved on the road, lanterns being lit again. The men were spreading out. Gideon tightened his arm around Tommy and began to crawl along the ditch toward the town lights, inch by inch, while the voices and footsteps closed behind them. And then, from the road above, Rourke called out, clear as a bell in the cold night, "Bring the dogs!" The word dogs changed the night. Gideon felt it before he heard anything else, felt the shift in the men above them, the confidence that came with teeth and noses and a chain you could pull tight. He kept low in the ditch, one arm locked around Tommy's ribs, the other dragging them forward through weeds and mud. Tommy's injured arm was pinned to his chest, sleeve heavy and dark. His breathing rasped like the air was scraping him raw. "Keep your mouth shut," Gideon whispered. "Breathe slow, through your nose." Tommy nodded, jaw clenched so tight his teeth clicked once. Above, boots crunched along the road. Lanterns swung, throwing light down into the ditch in long, searching sweeps. Gideon pressed Tommy under a tangle of roots when the light passed, then moved again when it slid away. "Sheriff!" Rourke barked. "They went toward town. Cut them off at Maine." Hollis answered through pain and anger. "I'm not blind, Rourke. Deputies, split. One to the church road, one to the livery." Gideon's mind ran ahead of his body. Town meant streets, witnesses, doors. But it also meant corners where men could be trapped. If they hit Maine with deputies waiting, the ditch would become a grave. He needed a different route, one nobody watched because nobody ever used it at night. There was an old drainage culvert near the back of the mill. Gideon had used it once years ago to cut across when the river ran high. It ran under the road and spat you out behind the feed store, close to the doctor's house. He turned Tommy's shoulders gently. "We're not going straight. You follow my pull." Tommy's eyes flicked up, wide, trusting and terrified all at once. "I'm going to slow you down." "You're going to stay alive," Gideon said. A whistle blew from the road above, sharp, a signal. Then the sound came. A low, excited baying, far at first, then nearer, like something waking up hungry. Tommy stiffened so hard Gideon felt it in his bones. "Dogs," Tommy mouthed. Gideon didn't answer. He didn't waste breath. He pushed them forward faster, ignoring the way his shoulder burned and his lungs tightened. The ditch narrowed and deepened, weeds giving way to slick mud. The town lights were closer now. He could see windows, hear faint music from a saloon, someone playing like the world was normal. Gideon's jaw tightened at the unfairness of it. A lantern beam cut down, sudden and bright. Gideon froze, holding Tommy still. The light hovered over the ditch, searching, then climbed away. A voice above. Nothing. Another voice, closer, eager. "Let the hounds work." The baying grew louder, now mixed with the rattle of chains. Gideon moved again, dragging Tommy through mud that sucked at boots. Tommy tried to help with his good arm, fingers digging into dirt, but every movement pulled pain into his face. "Don't look back," Gideon whispered. Tommy's throat worked. "I can smell them." So could Gideon, faintly. Wet fur, the sharp stink of animals excited and penned too long. They reached the culvert just as the first dog barked close enough to make Tommy flinch. The culvert was a dark hole under the road, half clogged with debris. Gideon shoved his arm in, feeling cold water and slime. "Go," he said to Tommy. "Head first. Crawl." Tommy stared at the black opening like it led to death. "Now," Gideon hissed. Tommy obeyed, pulling himself into the culvert with his good arm, dragging his bad leg and wounded arm behind him. Gideon followed, pushing from behind, shoulders scraping concrete. The culvert stank of rot and stale water. It was narrow enough that Gideon had to keep his head turned. Tommy's breathing echoed against the walls, small and quick. Outside, on the road above, voices tightened. "There!" someone shouted. "Tracks go down the ditch!" A dog let out a high, frantic yelp as if it had found something it liked. Gideon shoved Tommy forward hard. "Move!" Tommy crawled faster, whimpering once, then swallowing it. The dog barked again, nearer. Gideon heard the scrape of claws on dirt at the mouth of the ditch behind them. Then came Rourke's voice, sharp with satisfaction. "That's it. They're close." Gideon's chest tightened. If the dog reached the culvert entrance, it would follow scent straight through. And in a tunnel that narrow, Gideon couldn't shoot without deafening them both and risking ricochet. He could knife a dog if it came to it, but not before it latched onto Tommy. He'd never been afraid of animals. He was afraid of what men turned them into. "Faster," Gideon muttered. Tommy grunted, dragging his leg, shoulders shaking. His wounded arm left a smear of blood on the concrete. Gideon's eyes flicked to it, calculating how long until Tommy passed out. Then, a sound behind them. Wet, eager breathing, followed by claws scraping concrete. The dog had entered. Tommy's breath hitched. Gideon felt panic ripple through the boy's body like a shock. "Don't," Gideon whispered harshly. "Don't stop." The dog barked again, closer now, its voice amplified in the tunnel, bouncing, multiplying. Gideon could hear it sniffing, sucking air like it was drinking them. He reached down to his belt with one hand, fingers closing around his knife. He slid it free without a sound. Tommy crawled, and Gideon crawled behind him, knife in hand, body turned halfway so he could strike behind if he had to. The dog's claws clacked closer. A low growl rolled through the tunnel, deep and pleased. Tommy whispered, barely audible. "I can't." "You can," Gideon said. "You can because you have to." Then the dog lunged. Gideon didn't see it so much as feel it, an explosion of movement and teeth in the dark. He twisted, bringing the knife up hard, burying it into fur and muscle. The dog yelped, snapping, jaws closing on Gideon's sleeve instead of Tommy's leg. Pain flared, hot, sharp. Gideon shoved his forearm into the dog's mouth to keep it from grabbing deeper, then drove the knife again. The dog thrashed, claws scraping concrete, nails cutting skin through Gideon's coat. Tommy crawled forward, sobbing silently, not looking back. Gideon grunted and shoved the dog's body against the tunnel wall until the thrashing slowed. The animal's breathing turned wet, then stopped. Gideon yanked his arm free, teeth clenched against pain. His forearm was torn in 2 places, blood warm in the cold tunnel. Behind him, more barking echoed from the ditch mouth. Not one dog, several. Gideon's pulse spiked. He wiped his knife on his coat and shoved himself forward after Tommy, faster now, ignoring the burn in his arm. They reached the far end of the culvert where the tunnel opened behind the feed store. Gideon pushed Tommy out into cold air and darkness. Tommy collapsed onto wet grass, trying to suck air. Gideon hauled him up immediately. "No stopping," Gideon said. The feed store loomed on one side, the mill yard on the other. The town's back alleys were quiet, but not empty. Someone could step out and scream, and then the whole street would wake. Gideon guided Tommy along the shadow of the store, keeping him tight to the wall. Ahead, he saw the doctor's house, a small building with a lamp still burning in an upstairs window. Good. The doctor was awake, or at least not asleep yet. They moved, limping, half staggering. From the road behind, distant but clear, came shouting again. "They went under! Check the culvert!" A dog barked at the ditch mouth, wild and furious, as if it could smell Gideon's knife on its tongue. Gideon pushed Tommy harder. They reached the doctor's gate. Gideon didn't knock. He shoved it open, the hinge squealing. Tommy flinched at the sound. Gideon shot a look around the street, still empty. He half-dragged Tommy up the path and slammed his fist against the doctor's door, once, twice. "Doc!" Gideon hissed. "Open!" No answer. Gideon hammered again, louder. Tommy swayed beside him, eyes rolling for a second like the world was slipping. A curtain upstairs shifted. A woman's face appeared, older than Tommy, younger than Gideon, hair loose and dark. She stared down, alarmed. "Eliza," Gideon called, keeping his voice low but urgent. "It's me. Open the door." The window snapped shut. A moment later, the door cracked open just enough for a chain to catch. Eliza's eyes were sharp and wide, taking in Gideon's blood, Tommy's state, the dirt on both of them. "What in God's name?" "No time," Gideon said. "He's been shot. They're coming." Eliza's gaze dropped to Tommy's arm. Her mouth tightened. She yanked the chain off and opened the door. Gideon shoved Tommy inside, then stepped in after him, slamming the door and throwing the bolt. Eliza locked it, hands moving fast, then turned and stared at Tommy like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "That's a child," she said, voice breaking into anger. Tommy tried to speak, but only a whimper came out. Eliza grabbed him by the chin gently, lifting his face into lamplight. She saw the coal dust, the bruises, the cracked lips. Then her eyes dropped to his right hand where the brand sat like a stamp. Her expression went still. "Silver crown," she whispered. Gideon's stomach tightened. "You know it." "Everyone knows it," Eliza said, voice low and shaking with contained fury. "Most just pretend they don't." She guided Tommy to the kitchen table and pushed him down into a chair. Tommy collapsed forward, forehead nearly hitting wood. Eliza grabbed scissors, cloth, a bottle of spirits. She cut Tommy's sleeve carefully, peeling the fabric away. The bullet had torn through flesh along the upper arm, painful, bloody, but not deep enough to kill him tonight if it was cleaned. Tommy hissed, tears spilling. Eliza held him steady, talking to him in a voice softer than anything Gideon had heard from her before. "I know it hurts," she murmured. "I know." "You're safe in here." Tommy shook his head weakly. "No, nobody's safe." Gideon stood by the window, peering through a crack in the curtain. Lantern light moved at the end of the street. Shapes, men, too many. Hollis's deputies were spreading out, searching house by house, starting with places that didn't ask questions. If they came here, Eliza would be in the path too. Eliza followed Gideon's gaze. "They won't come to my house," she said, but there was doubt in it. "They'll come everywhere," Gideon replied. She poured spirits over the wound. Tommy cried out, then bit down on his own knuckle to keep it in. Eliza's eyes flicked to Gideon, almost accusing. "What did you do?" Gideon's mouth tightened. "I didn't do anything. I found him." "And you brought him here," Eliza said. "Yes," Gideon said, "because you're the only one in this town who still acts like a human being." Eliza didn't answer. She stitched fast, hands steady, jaw tight. When she finished, she wrapped the arm clean and firm. Tommy sagged in the chair, sweat on his brow. His eyes fluttered. Eliza brushed hair from his forehead. "What's your name?" "Tommy," he whispered. "Eliza," she said. "You listen to me, Tommy. You're not going back." Tommy's eyes opened wider, panic rising again. "They'll make me. They made the others." "How many others?" Gideon asked. Tommy's gaze slid to the floor. "A lot." "How many kids?" Eliza pressed. Tommy swallowed. 20, maybe more. Some are smaller than me. Some don't talk anymore." Eliza's hand tightened around the cloth until her knuckles went white. Gideon kept his eyes on the street. "Why'd they brand you?" Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper, like he was afraid the walls would carry it. "Because I tried to run. Because I asked to see the sky." Eliza looked at Gideon then, something fierce in her eyes. "You can't just hide him. You know that." Gideon didn't answer immediately. He watched the lanterns drift closer. He could make out Hollis's broad shape now, head bandaged, anger in the way he moved. "If we get him out of town," Gideon said, "we can keep him alive." "For how long?" Eliza shot back. "Until Crane gets tired of looking? Until he buys the next man you trust?" Gideon's jaw worked. He didn't like the truth when it came from someone else. Eliza leaned in, voice cutting. "You need proof. You need something that breaks the mine open in daylight." Gideon stared at her. "Proof don't stop bullets." "It stops silence," Eliza said. "And silence is what keeps those children underground." Tommy lifted his head weakly. "There's a book," he whispered. Gideon's spine stiffened. "What?" Tommy licked his split lip. "A ledger, in the office. Names, debts, who owns what. They write the mark next to it like cattle." Eliza's breath caught. "If that exists—" "It does," Tommy said, voice shaking. "I saw it. I used to clean the office. The foreman made me. I had to read sometimes. I didn't want to." Gideon's mind flashed back to what Tommy had said on the road. Heart. Just heart. Gideon swallowed. "Did you see a name in it? Heart." Tommy hesitated, eyes darting to Gideon's face. "Yes." The kitchen went still. Eliza stared at Gideon. "Why would your name be in a mine ledger?" Gideon's throat tightened. He didn't answer. He watched the street again, and the lanterns were closer. Outside, a dog barked. Short, excited. Eliza's face drained. "They brought dogs into town." Gideon nodded once, grim. "They're not hunting a thief. They're hunting a secret." Eliza stepped to the back window and peered out. "There's an alley behind my house. If you go now—" A fist slammed against the front door. The whole house shuddered with the impact. Eliza froze. Another slam, harder. A man's voice, loud enough to be heard through wood. "Eliza Harrow, open up!" Hollis. Gideon moved between the door and the table without thinking. He drew his revolver, holding it low so Tommy wouldn't see the full shape of what was happening. Eliza whispered, "He can't—" Another slam. "I said open up!" Tommy tried to stand. His legs wobbled. "No!" he whispered, terror flooding him. "No, no, no!" Eliza grabbed his shoulders and shoved him down. "Stay!" The dog barked again, right outside, furious, scraping at the porch boards. Gideon's pulse pounded. He looked for another exit, back door, window, anything. But the lantern light outside had spread. Shadows moved past curtains. They'd surrounded the house. Hollis's voice turned cold and official. "By authority of this county, you are harboring stolen property and aiding a fugitive. Open the door, or I'll break it down." Eliza's eyes locked on Gideon's. "If you shoot a sheriff, I'm not shooting him," Gideon said. "Not first." Another crash. The doorframe groaned. Tommy's breathing turned into a thin, broken wheeze. He was shaking so hard the chair rattled. Gideon leaned close to Eliza, voice barely audible. "Where's your cellar?" Eliza blinked. "What?" "Cellar," Gideon repeated fast. "Now." Eliza swallowed and pointed toward a trapdoor near the pantry. Gideon grabbed Tommy under the arms and hauled him up. Tommy winced, arm flaring with pain. "I can't." "You can," Gideon said, and there was no softness left. "Move." They crossed the kitchen in 3 quick steps. Eliza yanked the pantry rug back and hooked her fingers under the trapdoor ring. Outside, the door splintered. Wood cracked like bone. Eliza lifted the trapdoor. Cold air rose from below. "Down," Gideon ordered. Tommy started to climb, then froze as a huge shadow slammed against the front door again. A jagged line of light split through the wood as it gave. Hollis's silhouette appeared in the crack. Gideon shoved Tommy's shoulders, forcing him down into the dark. Eliza followed, dropping after him, hands scrambling on the ladder rungs. Gideon was last. He looked once toward the front room where the door was breaking, where lantern light was spilling in, where boots were about to step over the threshold. Then he dropped into the cellar and pulled the trapdoor down above them. The moment it shut, the front door finally exploded inward. Boots pounded into the house, a dog's nails scraped hardwood, and above their heads, Hollis's voice filled the room like a verdict. "Find the boy." In the cellar, the air was damp and cold enough to sting Gideon's lungs. It smelled like potatoes, old earth, and the sharp tang of lamp oil. Eliza had a lantern down there, small, covered. She struck it once and cupped the flame so the light stayed low. Above them, the house creaked under Boots. Tommy clamped both hands over his mouth to keep from making a sound. Gideon could feel his whole body shaking through the boy's thin shoulders. "Quiet," Eliza mouthed, eyes wide. A dog barked upstairs, frantic. Nails scraped hardwood in tight circles. Gideon's jaw tightened. The animal was close enough now that Gideon could hear it sniffing, sucking in air like it was pulling scent straight through the floorboards. Hollis's voice rolled through the house. "Pantry, back room, under the beds, anywhere he can fit." Another voice answered, one of the deputies. "Yes, Sheriff." Furniture shifted. A drawer was yanked open. Something heavy was thrown onto the floor. Eliza's hands fluttered at her throat once, then steadied as she reached for Tommy's arm, checking the bandage. Blood seeped through the cloth in a slow bloom. Gideon leaned close, whispering into her ear. "How deep does this cellar run?" Eliza shook her head. "Just this room. There's a coal chute, but it leads to the alley. They'll see the door." Gideon's gaze flicked to the chute, a small square of wood near the far wall, bolted. If it opened to the alley, it might be their only way out. It might also be the first place the dog dragged men to. Upstairs, the dog barked again, higher, sharper, then went suddenly silent. Gideon's blood turned cold. Silence from a hunting dog wasn't relief. It meant the dog had found what it wanted. Hollis's voice shifted too, lower, focused. "What's he got?" A deputy's voice, uneasy. "Smells something by the pantry." Boots moved across the kitchen overhead. The floorboards above the trapdoor groaned. Eliza's eyes snapped to Gideon. Her lips formed a soundless word. "No." Gideon's revolver was already in his hand, held low, barrel angled toward the trapdoor. He wasn't going to shoot through it, not yet. He was listening for the exact moment metal touched ring, the exact moment wood lifted. Tommy's eyes were huge in the lantern glow. Tears ran silently down his cheeks, carving clean lines through coal dust. A scraping sound above them, slow, deliberate, the rug being pulled back. Eliza's hand flew to her mouth to stop her own breath. Then a dog whined, excited, and scratched hard at the floor. Nails scraped wood inches above their heads. Hollis. "Right there," a deputy laughed, nervous. "Well, I'll be damned." The ring clinked, metal on metal. Gideon's muscles tightened like wire. The trapdoor shifted a fraction, letting a hairline of light spill through. Tommy's chest hitched. Gideon reached back and clamped a hand over Tommy's sternum, holding him still with pressure. Not cruel, necessary. The trapdoor lifted another inch. Gideon shoved the barrel of his revolver up into the opening and fired. The shot detonated in the cellar like a cannon. Wood splintered. A man screamed, high and shocked. The trapdoor slammed down hard as if somebody fell backward off it. Upstairs erupted, "Jesus! He's shot! He's in the cellar!" Hollis's voice, furious and pained. "Don't go down there! Get back!" The dog barked wild, then yelped like it had been kicked. Eliza flinched at the gunshot's echo, but she didn't freeze. She moved, fast, smart, grabbing Tommy's good arm and pulling him toward the coal chute. Gideon followed, ears ringing, every nerve hot. Hollis roared overhead, "Get that door open again! Bring a lantern! Don't let him out!" Another deputy shouted, "He's got a gun!" Eliza's fingers flew at the bolts on the chute door. They were stiff with age. She yanked. Nothing. "Help me," she hissed. Gideon holstered the revolver and threw his shoulder into the chute. Wood groaned. He shoved again, harder, pain flaring through his wounded arm. The bolt gave with a snap. Cold night air spilled in from outside, clean and dangerous. Eliza pushed the chute open a crack and peered out. The alley beyond was dark, but lantern light moved at the far end of it. Shadows. Men. "They're out there," Eliza whispered. "Not right here," Gideon said. Above them, the trapdoor ring clinked again. This time, they were going to come prepared. Hollis. "Smoke 'em out if you have to." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "They got kerosene." Eliza's face tightened. "They'll burn my house." "They'll burn anything," Gideon corrected. Tommy's breathing turned into a thin, panicked rasp. Don't let them." Gideon gripped his shoulder. "We're leaving." He looked at Eliza. First. Eliza hesitated just long enough for Gideon to see the war in her eyes, fear, anger, responsibility. Then she nodded once and climbed into the chute, pulling herself through into the alley. Tommy followed, awkward with his leg, wincing, dragging himself with his good arm. Gideon lifted him by the belt and shoved him through. Gideon was last. He grabbed the lantern and snuffed it with his palm, plunging the cellar into darkness. Then he pulled himself up into the chute. The alley smelled like wet wood and horse manure and smoke from distant chimneys. Eliza held Tommy upright against the wall. Gideon slid down beside them, landing hard. At the far end of the alley, a lantern bobbed, coming closer. Gideon grabbed Eliza's wrist and pulled her the other way, deeper into shadow. "Stay against the wall." They moved fast, silent as they could be. Tommy limped, breath-catching, but he didn't speak. He just kept going, eyes wide. A voice drifted closer from the mouth of the alley, one of Hollis's deputies. "Check behind the feed store. He might have slipped out the back." Another voice answered, low and amused. "Rourke. He's clever, but clever don't beat dogs." A dog barked somewhere, angry and eager. Gideon guided them behind a stack of broken crates and waited, holding his breath. Lantern light swept the alley. 2 men walked past, deputies, rifles in hand. Their boots splashed shallow puddles. One of them sniffed hard like he could smell fear. The dog's leash chain rattled. The hound strained, nose down, pulling toward the spot where Gideon and Tommy hid. Gideon's fingers tightened on the revolver under his coat. If the dog rounded the crates, it was over. The deputy tugged the leash. "Come on, you damn thing." The dog whined, pulling harder, Rourke's voice from farther back. "Let him work." The deputy hesitated, then loosened the leash a little. The dog surged forward, straight toward the crates. Tommy's body tensed, a silent scream in every muscle. Eliza's hand covered his mouth again. Gideon waited until the dog's head came around the edge, eyes gleaming in lantern spill. Then Gideon stepped out and kicked the crate hard. Wood crashed. The sound exploded in the narrow alley, echoing like a gunshot. The dog startled and lunged at the falling crate instead of the scent. The deputy jerked the leash, cursing. "What the hell was that?" Gideon didn't wait. He grabbed Tommy and Eliza and ran them the opposite direction, deeper into the back lanes, toward the darkest stretch behind the church and the livery. They moved like shadows, but shadows still made noise. Tommy's limp slowed them. Eliza's breath came fast. Gideon's injured arm burned with every pull. Behind them, the dog barked, furious now, and the deputy shouted, "Over there! I heard something!" Lantern light swung wildly, chasing. Gideon cut across behind the church, where graves sat like dark teeth in the ground. The irony bit him. He was running past the place men got buried, trying to keep a child from becoming another hole in the earth. At the back of the churchyard, a narrow fence separated the graves from the livery lot. Gideon pushed Tommy toward it. "Over," Gideon whispered. Tommy stared at the fence, then shook his head weakly. "My leg." Gideon didn't argue. He lifted Tommy under the arms and heaved him over the fence. Tommy landed awkward, biting back a cry. Eliza climbed after, skirts catching on wood. Gideon went last, vaulting despite pain. They dropped into the livery lot, dark, quiet, smelling of hay and horses. A single lantern burned inside the stable, dim. Gideon knew the owner, a man named Cal, who liked Gideon's money and didn't like trouble. Gideon didn't have time to find out which one he liked more. He shoved them toward the stable's side door. Eliza grabbed Gideon's sleeve. "Where are you taking us?" "A horse," Gideon whispered. "If we leave town on foot, they'll catch us in 10 minutes. We ride." "And if Cale refuses?" Gideon's eyes stayed on the door. "Then we don't ask," Tommy whispered, voice broken. "They'll follow. They always follow." Gideon tightened his grip. "Not if we're smart." He eased the side door open. A warm wave of hay smell and animal breath hit them. Horses shifted in stalls, ears flicking. The lantern inside threw long shadows. Gideon stepped in first, revolver low, eyes scanning. A man sat on a stool near the tack wall, half asleep, hat tipped over his eyes. A stable hand. He stirred at the sound. "Who's there?" the man muttered. Gideon moved fast. He crossed the distance in 2 strides and slammed the man back against the wall, forearm to throat. "Quiet," Gideon hissed. The man's eyes went wide, hands up. "Hart? Gideon, what? You didn't see me," Gideon whispered. "You didn't see anybody, you understand?" The stable hand's throat bobbed. He nodded quickly. Eliza slipped in behind, guiding Tommy. Gideon released the man and pointed to the far corner. "Sit, don't move. If you yell, you die." The stable hand swallowed hard and slid down to sit, shaking. Gideon went straight to the nearest stall and yanked the door open. The horse inside was a sturdy brown gelding, calm-eyed. Gideon grabbed a saddle from the rack and threw it on with hands that moved like he'd done it 1,000 times, because he had. Eliza watched, face pale. "You're stealing." Gideon didn't look at her. "Borrowing." Tommy leaned against a post, swaying. His eyes fluttered again. Gideon finished cinching the girth and turned to Eliza. "Can you ride?" Eliza's jaw tightened. "Yes?" "Good," Gideon said. He pointed to another stall. "Saddle that one." Eliza hesitated, then did it, hands shaking but sure. She'd been a frontier doctor long enough to do hard things without permission. Outside, the dog barked again, closer now. Voices followed. "There, livery lot, I heard the door." Gideon's head snapped toward the stable hand. The man's eyes were huge, terrified. He hadn't yelled. The sound had been them, or the dog. Eliza's voice dropped. "They're here." Gideon lifted Tommy under the arms. "Up!" Tommy tried to climb into the saddle and failed. Gideon hoisted him, setting him down in front of the saddle horn. Tommy grabbed leather with his good hand, knuckles white. Eliza mounted her horse, breath tight. Gideon swung up behind Tommy on the gelding. Then, the stable's big doors rattled, someone yanking at the latch. A deputy's voice loud. "Open up! Sheriff's business!" Cale's stable hand whimpered once, involuntary. Gideon leaned close to Tommy's ear. "Hold tight! Don't let go!" Tommy nodded, trembling. Gideon kicked the gelding forward, straight toward the back exit of the stable that opened onto the narrow lane behind the buildings. The gelding surged. At the same moment, the front doors burst open and lantern light flooded in. "Hart!" Hollis roared. Gideon didn't look back. He drove the horse through the back door, splintering it wide, and the 3 of them exploded into the night alley behind the livery, only to find a line of lanterns already waiting at the far end, blocking the lane like a wall of fire. And in the center of that line, sitting calm in the saddle, was Silas Crane himself. His hat brim lifted just enough to show a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Evening," Crane called. "You made this a bigger problem than it had to be." Crane's voice was calm, almost polite, like he was greeting Gideon at a church social instead of cutting off his escape with armed men. Behind Crane, lanterns bobbed in a neat line. Miners and deputies mixed together, rifles cradled like they'd practiced this. On the rooftops, shapes moved. Gideon saw the glint of metal, the silhouettes of men posted high to watch every alley mouth. Crane hadn't followed. He'd arranged. Gideon eased the gelding to a stop, careful. Tommy stiffened in front of him, fingers locked on the saddle horn. Eliza's horse sidestepped, nervous, eyes rolling at the wall of light. Crane tipped his head slightly, studying the three of them like merchandise brought out for inspection. He was dressed cleaner than the men around him, coat brushed, gloves pale. His face was narrow, handsome in a hard way, and his eyes were flat as slate. "You stole one of my horses," Crane said mildly. Gideon didn't answer. Crane's gaze slid to Tommy's bandaged arm, then to the branded hand. Something like satisfaction flickered there. "And you stole one of my workers." "He's a boy," Eliza snapped before Gideon could speak. Crane's eyes moved to her slowly. "Dr. Harrow." Eliza's chin lifted, but her hands trembled on the reins. Crane smiled at her the way a man smiles at someone he's already decided how to ruin. "It's unfortunate you involved yourself. You've been useful to this town." "Useful?" Eliza said, disgust curling her lip. "You mean quiet?" Crane's smile didn't change. "I mean paid." Gideon leaned forward, voice low. "Let them go." Crane's eyes returned to Gideon. "You're in no position to bargain, Mr. Hart." Gideon held his gaze. "Then why are you talking?" Crane's expression sharpened by a fraction. For the first time, Gideon saw irritation, not anger, something colder, like a man noticing a stain on his cuff. "Because," Crane said, "this didn't have to become noisy." Behind Crane, Rourke sat his horse, head slightly bowed, as if letting Crane enjoy the moment, but his eyes were fixed on Gideon, hungry, waiting for recognition to become a cage. Sheriff Hollis appeared behind them, face wrapped, his nose swollen, blood crusted at his mustache. He was breathing hard, angry enough to shake. "Shoot him," Hollis growled. Crane didn't even look back. "No," Hollis bristled. "He hit me. He fired on my deputies. He broke into a business." Crane's voice stayed quiet, but it cut. "Sheriff, you'll do what I pay you to do, and you'll do it without embarrassing yourself further." Hollis went rigid, humiliated. His jaw worked. He didn't argue, because arguing meant remembering who owned him. Crane lifted his eyes to Gideon again. "You can still make this simple. Hand the boy down. The doctor rides home. You go back to your ranch and pretend tonight was a fever dream." Tommy's shoulders trembled. Gideon felt the boy's fear like heat through cloth. Eliza leaned toward Gideon, whispering through clenched teeth. "He's enjoying this." "Quiet," Gideon murmured without moving his lips. Crane's gaze flicked between them, missing nothing. "Or," he continued, "you can insist on making yourself a problem. And I will solve you the way I solve all problems." He nodded once. At the end of the alley behind Gideon, a lantern flared. Men stepped into view, more deputies, blocking the back exit now. A second net, closing. Gideon's pulse stayed slow. He'd been trapped before. Different place. Same feeling. The world narrowing, choices shrinking. Crane sighed as if the inconvenience pained him. "Mr. Hart, I don't like waste. Don't make me waste good men tonight." Gideon's fingers tightened around the reins. The revolver on his hip felt suddenly heavy and useless. Crane's eyes dropped, noticing something. "Tommy, isn't it?" he said, voice softening in a false way. Tommy didn't answer. He was staring at Crane like a rabbit stares at a hawk. Crane leaned forward slightly. "If you come back quietly, I'll put you above ground for a week. Let your arm heal. Food that isn't mold." Tommy's breath hitched. Temptation flickered across his face like shame. Eliza snapped, "Don't listen to him." Crane ignored her. His eyes stayed on Tommy. "You know I keep my word, boy. Better than these people will." Gideon's jaw tightened. That was the hook. Crane wasn't offering mercy. He was offering a chain that felt like warmth. Tommy whispered, voice cracked, "He lies." Crane's smile faded. "Watch your mouth." Rourke shifted, hand drifting toward the branding iron hanging from his saddle like a trophy. He let the metal show, letting the boy see it. Tommy flinched. Gideon felt something in his chest go hard. "Enough." Crane's attention returned to Gideon. "What's enough? The boy's mine. The doctor's naive. And you—" His eyes narrowed. "You're interesting." Gideon didn't blink. "Let them go. Take me." Eliza jerked. Gideon, Crane studied him for a long moment, like he was measuring value. Then he smiled again. "Take you?" "Yes," Gideon said. "You want a show of force. Take me. I'll walk back with you. Quiet. No dogs, no fire, no blood in the street." Crane's eyes glinted. And the boy?" Gideon's voice stayed even. "The boy goes with the doctor." Crane laughed softly. You think you can trade like that? Gideon held his gaze. You're not here because of one boy. You're here because you don't want me to become a story. Crane's smile thinned. He understood the truth in it. Eliza whispered, urgent, "What are you doing?" Gideon didn't answer her. He watched Crane's hands, watched Rourke's posture, watched the angles of rifles. Crane leaned back in his saddle. "Mr. Hart, you're not a martyr. You're a rancher with a stubborn streak." Gideon said nothing. Crane's eyes drifted almost lazily to Gideon's left hand. Gideon kept it still, gloved. But Crane was watching anyway, as if he knew there was something beneath that leather worth owning. Rourke spoke up, voice low and pleased. "He ain't just stubborn, sir." Crane's gaze sharpened. "Explain." Rourke's smile showed teeth. "He's got history with the crown." Eliza's eyes snapped to Gideon, confusion and fear mixing. Tommy's breath hitched again, like he could feel the adult's words turning into danger. Crane's smile returned, slower now. "History." Gideon's pulse beat once, hard. Crane tilted his head. "Take off the glove, Mr. Hart." Gideon didn't move. Crane's voice stayed soft. "Take it off." Hollis shifted behind Crane, watching like a man at a hanging. Gideon said, "No." Crane's eyes went flat. "If you don't, I'll have my men pull the doctor off that horse and drag the boy back screaming. We'll do it slow so everyone can hear. And when the town asks questions tomorrow, Sheriff Hollis will explain it was necessary." Hollis swallowed, but he didn't protest. Eliza's face went pale. Tommy started to shake again, his injured arm pressed tight to his chest. Gideon stared at Crane, feeling the trap lock. Crane smiled faintly. "Now, the glove." Gideon lifted his left hand slowly. Eliza whispered, "Gideon, don't." Gideon didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on Crane's. He hooked 2 fingers under the glove's cuff and pulled. Leather slid off. In the lantern light, the skin of Gideon's palm showed an old scar, faded but unmistakable. A crown over a pickaxe, burned in deep years ago, the edges warped where flesh had tried to heal over ownership. The alley went silent. Even the horses seemed to stop breathing. Crane stared at Gideon's hand like he'd just found buried gold. Rourke's grin widened, triumphant. "Told you." Crane's voice was almost tender. "Well, that explains why you run a ranch like a man hiding from the dark." Gideon's throat tightened. He didn't speak. Crane leaned forward, eyes bright now. "What name did you have when you wore my mark?" Tommy whispered, barely audible. "He's marked too." Eliza's face twisted with horror. "Gideon." Crane's smile sharpened. "Answer me." Gideon's jaw flexed. He stared straight into Crane's eyes and said, "You don't get my name." Crane's expression hardened. The softness vanished. He nodded once, small, decisive. "Take them," Crane said. Rifles came up. Men stepped forward from both ends of the alley. And in the chaos of boots and horses and lantern glare, Tommy turned his head toward Gideon, eyes wide with something new. Recognition, maybe, or hope, and whispered one sentence that made Gideon's blood go colder than the night air. "They said the old marked man escaped, but they never found his brother." Crane's men moved in like they had rehearsed it. 2 from the front, 2 from behind, rifles up, voices low, boots sure. Gideon didn't reach for his revolver. He didn't have the angle without getting Tommy killed. Eliza's horse danced, sensing the squeeze of bodies. Tommy clutched the saddle horn so hard his knuckles blanched through grime. "Easy," Crane said, not to calm anyone, just to savor control. "Nobody needs to get hurt." Hollis shoved forward, still nursing his broken pride. "You heard him! Down off the horse, Hart!" Gideon kept his eyes on Crane. "You want me." "You don't need them." Crane's gaze slid to Eliza like she was an insect buzzing near his ear. "Dr. Harrow chose to stand beside you." Eliza spat the words out. "He chose to stand beside a child." Rourke laughed under his breath and stepped closer, rope in hand now, coiling it like a promise. "Look at you, Hart, back in the herd." Gideon's left palm burned under the lantern light, as if the old mark had woken up. He forced his fingers to curl, hiding it again, even though it was too late. Tommy whispered, shaking, "They'll take me first." Gideon leaned close without turning his head. "When I say go, you go with Eliza. Don't look back." Eliza's voice came tight. "How?" Gideon's eyes flicked to the nearest lantern post and the stacked barrels beside the alley wall. One well-placed shot could drop light, create shadow, but the second net behind them had men ready. And Crane himself sat centered, calm as a judge. Gideon said, "I'll make a gap." Crane heard the tone change. He smiled barely. "You're thinking. Don't." Then he nodded at Rourke. Rourke stepped forward and lifted the branding iron from his saddle hook, letting it hang where Tommy could see. The metal caught lantern glow and looked wet. Tommy's breathing broke. "No." "Quiet," Rourke murmured. "We'll do it proper when you're back. Make sure it takes this time." Gideon felt his vision narrow. He shifted his weight on the saddle, letting the gelding's body block his right hip. Hollis barked, "Hands where I can see 'em!" Crane's voice overrode him, soft and final. "Mr. Hart, climb down. Walk to me, now." Gideon didn't move. Crane's eyes hardened. "Rourke!" Rourke took one step toward Tommy. Gideon's hand snapped down and cleared leather in one fluid motion. The first shot didn't go toward a man. It went into the nearest lantern. Glass burst. Flame died. Darkness slammed into the alley like a curtain. Horses screamed, startled. Men cursed. Rifles fired too fast. Blind shots, panic shots, splinters snapping off barrels and walls. "Eliza, go!" Gideon roared. Eliza didn't hesitate. She yanked her horse's head hard and drove it sideways into the thinnest part of the line, shoulder-checking a deputy who went down with a shout. Tommy clung to the saddle horn as the horse lurched. Gideon fired again, this time low, into the ground near hooves, just enough to scatter men and make them flinch back. Then Rourke's voice cut through the chaos, sharp as a whip. "Light it up!" Lanterns flared from both ends. In a heartbeat, the alley was bright again, brighter than before, revealing positions, revealing motion. Crane sat in the center like he'd never moved. And Gideon saw the worst thing. A deputy on the roofline had Eliza and Tommy in his sights, rifle steady, not panicked. That man had been waiting for exactly this. Gideon didn't think. He fired. The bullet struck the roof edge just under the deputy's elbow. The man jerked, rifle kicking wide. The shot he fired went into air. Eliza's horse surged past, hooves pounding, hauling Tommy toward the dark side street. And Crane lifted his hand, calm as a man swatting a fly. Two men stepped out from the shadows and swung a heavy chain across the mouth of the side street like a gate. Eliza pulled hard, too late. Her horse hit the chain chest first. It screamed, reared, and Eliza went backward in the saddle, fighting to stay on. Tommy slipped sideways, losing his grip. Gideon's heart slammed. "Tommy!" Tommy fell. He hit the dirt hard and rolled, bad leg twisting. He cried out, one raw sound, and then tried to scramble up with his good arm, panic turning his body into a frantic animal. Rourke was on him in seconds, leaping down, grabbing Tommy by the collar. Tommy screamed, "No! No!" Eliza tried to jump down, but men grabbed her horse's bridle and yanked it back, trapping her in the saddle. Hands reached for her wrists. Gideon fired, aiming for the ground near Rourke's boots, forcing him to jerk back. "Careful!" Rourke shouted, hauling Tommy behind him as a shield. Tommy's branded hand flailed, fingers clawing at air. Crane's voice remained maddeningly even. "Mr. Hart, put the gun down!" Gideon's revolver shook, not with fear, with restraint. He could shoot Rourke, he could try. Tommy would take the bullet instead. Crane had arranged that too. Hollis stepped forward, face twisted. "Do it, Gideon, or I swear!" Crane cut him off without looking. "Sheriff, stop talking." Hollis went silent. Eliza shouted, fighting hands on her. "Gideon, don't you dare!" Tommy sobbed, breathless. "Don't let them, please!" Gideon stared at Crane, and the world narrowed again to one choice. Pride or life. He lowered the revolver. Rourke's grin flashed. "Smart." Gideon placed the gun on the dirt slowly with 2 fingers and kicked it away. Crane nodded. "Good." Rourke yanked Tommy forward, dragging him by the arm. Tommy screamed and tried to bite. Rourke backhanded him once, hard, and Tommy went limp for a second, then came back shaking, whimpering. Eliza's scream turned to a sound of pure hate. "You coward!" Crane finally looked at her. "Doctor, you'll return to your home. You'll sleep, and tomorrow you will continue treating the town as if nothing happened. If you speak, I will close your practice and let people die of infection while they blame you." Eliza's eyes burned. "You're a monster." Crane's smile was thin. "I'm an employer." He turned back to Gideon. "As for you, you're coming with us." Gideon didn't answer. Rourke tightened a rope around Gideon's wrists, rough and practiced. Gideon didn't fight. Fighting here would only give them an excuse to shoot Eliza in the street. They shoved Gideon forward toward Crane's horse. As Gideon passed, Crane leaned down slightly, voice just for him. "You don't get to keep children you find on roads, Mr. Hart. You especially don't get to interfere with my mine." Gideon met his eyes. "You can't keep the truth buried forever." Crane's expression didn't change. "Truth is just rock until someone digs it out, and I control the digging." He nodded to Hollis. "Take the doctor home." Hollis hesitated, shame fighting obedience. Then he jerked his chin at two deputies. "Do it." Eliza fought as they dragged her horse around. She twisted in the saddle, reaching toward Tommy. "Tommy, look at me! You hold on!" Tommy's eyes found hers, wild and wet. He tried to speak, but Rourke shoved a filthy cloth into his mouth and tied it behind his head. Tommy's muffled cries turned into choking sobs. Gideon's chest went tight. He took a step forward despite the rope, muscles straining. Rourke slammed him in the gut with an elbow. Gideon folded, breath forced out. Crane watched without emotion. They forced Gideon upright and marched him down the alley, away from the lights, toward the road that led back into the Black Hills. As they passed the edge of town, Gideon looked back once. He saw Eliza being hauled the opposite way, her face turned over her shoulder, eyes locked on Gideon like she was trying to memorize him. He saw Tommy being lifted onto a horse like a sack, small body bouncing, hands bound, the brand on his palm flashing in moonlight. And just before the town swallowed them, Rourke leaned close to Gideon's ear and whispered, pleased. "You heard what the boy said about your brother." Gideon didn't answer. Rourke continued, voice low as a shovel scraping dirt. "We've got someone at the mine who's been waiting a long time for you to come back. Someone who remembers your old name." Gideon's blood turned colder than the night wind. Ahead, the road climbed toward the hills. Lanterns bobbed like a line of will-o-wisps leading into darkness. Gideon walked with his hands tied, surrounded by rifles, listening to Tommy's muffled sobs fading behind him as the horse carrying the boy took a different turn. Then, Crane's voice floated forward from the lead horse, casual as a man discussing weather. "Bring Hart to the office. I want to see the ledger." The mine road climbed fast, trading town lanterns for the colder, meaner light of stars. Gideon stumbled once on loose rock, on purpose, just enough to test the rope around his wrists. It was tight, but not perfect. Rourke had tied it like he wanted Gideon uncomfortable, not useless. A man who expected to break you later left you some movement now. Crane rode ahead, coat collar up, looking like he belonged anywhere he decided to sit. Two miners flanked Gideon, rifles angled low but ready. Another rode behind with a lantern, making sure Gideon's shadow never disappeared. Gideon kept his eyes down. He counted steps. He listened for patterns in hooves. He watched how men shifted when they were bored and how they shifted when they were scared. Behind him, Rourke spoke once, just loud enough to carry. "Keep him breathing. Mr. Crane wants to talk." Gideon didn't answer. They reached the Silver Crown camp near midnight. It wasn't a town. It was a machine built out of wood and iron and smoke. Black hills rose behind it like shoulders. The head frame towered over everything, a skeletal giant. Even at night the mine worked, lanterns moving, wagons creaking, men shouting short commands like they were afraid of wasting breath, and under it all, the sound, constant, low, like the earth grinding its teeth. Gideon smelled coal dust before he saw the first shack. It coated the air, sat on every surface, clung to skin. Men here all looked older than they were, eyes rimmed in dark, coughs tucked into sleeves. A bell clanged somewhere, a shift change. Gideon's stomach tightened at the memory of Tommy saying he'd run during a shift change. Kids moving in lines, heads down, no talking. They marched Gideon past the bunkhouses and the ore piles toward the office building, Crane's clean little island at the edge of the filth. It had glass windows, real hinges, a porch swept clear of dust like someone thought that mattered. At the door, two guards stepped aside. One of them looked at Gideon's hands and smirked. Rourke grabbed Gideon by the shoulder and shoved him up the steps. "Watch your feet. Wouldn't want you falling before Mr. Crane gets his answers." Inside, the air changed. Less smoke, more ink, lamp oil, polished wood. It felt like stepping into a lie. Crane took off his gloves and set them on the desk as if he'd just finished dinner. He didn't sit yet. He stood behind the desk with a ledger open in front of him, the lamplight bright on the paper. Gideon's eyes locked on the ledger the moment he saw it. Thick book, heavy spine, pages smudged by dirty fingers, columns, names, numbers, symbols, marks. Crane looked up. Sit. Gideon didn't move. Crane sighed softly, like patience was a burden. Rourke slammed Gideon down into a chair. The wood bit into Gideon's back. Crane turned a page with one finger. You know what I enjoy about ledgers, Mr. Hart? They never lie. People lie. Men swear on Bibles and then eat their own words. But paper only says what it's told. He tapped the page. And this paper says you belong to me. Gideon stared at the book. He could see the crown and pickaxe symbol in the margin beside certain names. Some had 2 marks, some had notes in a smaller hand. Belonged, Gideon said. Crane's eyes flicked up. Still belong, technically. You never paid your debt. I didn't owe you, Gideon said. Crane smiled faintly. Everyone owes someone. Rourke circled behind Gideon, hands resting on Gideon's shoulders as if he was a friend. His fingers squeezed, just enough pressure to remind Gideon that any movement would cost. Crane leaned forward and pointed at a line on the page. There, see? The ledger remembers. It remembers better than you want to. Gideon leaned in, despite himself. The name printed there wasn't Gideon Hart. It was another name, one Gideon hadn't heard spoken in years, one he'd buried with the man who used to answer to it. Crane watched Gideon's face carefully. There it is, your old name. I wondered if it would still fit you. Gideon's throat went tight. He kept his voice steady. That name belongs to a dead man. Crane's smile thinned. Not dead enough. He flipped another page, slow, deliberate, then pushed the ledger across the desk until the lamplight hit a different line. There's another name that keeps appearing near yours, Crane said. A name you pretend you've forgotten. Gideon's eyes dropped to the page. Kellen Rowan, listed once, then again, then scratched out, then written again with a note in the margin. Gideon's pulse hit hard. Rowan. He could feel Rourke's grip tighten behind him, sensing the shift. Crane watched the reaction like a man watching a fish bite. Your brother, Crane said softly. Do you see how long the ledger has been waiting for you to look at him? Gideon's jaw flexed. You don't know what you're talking about. Crane's eyes stayed flat. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Rowan Kellen was a good worker until he got proud. He talked about leaving, about taking his boy and going where my reach couldn't find him. Tommy? Gideon's mouth went dry. Crane's tone stayed almost conversational. So Rowan disappeared. Gideon's voice came out rougher than he wanted. You killed him, Crane shrugged. Men die in mines all the time. Timber fails, gas pockets ignite, a beam falls the wrong way. Tragic, really. Rourke leaned close to Gideon's ear, whispering with pleasure. He asked about the sky, too. Gideon's hands curled around nothing, rope biting his wrists. Crane continued. Before Rowan vanished, he made a mistake. He left something behind. Crane nodded to the corner of the room. A guard pulled a cloth sack off a shelf and set it on the desk with a thud. Crane opened it and poured its contents out. A small, worn item rolled into the lamplight, a brass pendant on a broken leather cord stamped with a simple design, a star inside a circle, the kind a man wore under his shirt, close to skin. Gideon's stomach dropped. He knew that pendant. He'd held it in his hand when he was younger, before the mine, before the mark, before he learned what men did for money. Crane watched him like a hawk. Recognize it? Gideon didn't speak. Crane leaned closer, voice soft as dirt falling on a coffin. Rowan begged me to give this to his boy. He said it would prove who the boy is. Tommy. Gideon's chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. Crane sat down finally, folding his hands. So now you understand why that child is valuable. Not just as labor, as leverage. Gideon forced his voice out. What do you want? Crane smiled. The same thing I always want. Control. He opened the ledger again and tapped a different page. You have a talent for surviving, for slipping through cracks. Men like you become myths if I let you. He looked up. I don't let myths exist. Rourke's hand slid down Gideon's arm, grabbing his left wrist and yanking the glove-free palm up into the lamplight again, forcing the old mark to show. Crane's eyes gleamed. That mark is insurance. It tells everyone who you are when you lie. Gideon clenched his jaw. It tells everyone what you did. Crane's smile vanished. The air in the room sharpened. He stood, leaned over the desk, and spoke in a voice that made the guards straighten. Here's how this goes. You're going back underground. Gideon's eyes snapped up. No. Crane held his gaze. Yes, you'll work. You'll cough, you'll bleed, and you'll do it quiet. Gideon's voice turned deadly. I'll die first. Crane nodded once, as if Gideon had just confirmed a detail. If you die, the boy goes deeper. The doctor loses her license and her home. And the ledger disappears. Gideon's breath came slow through his nose. He felt the trap tighten around everything he cared about. Crane leaned closer again. But if you obey, I might be generous. I might let the boy heal above ground. I might let him eat real food. I might even let you speak to him once. Gideon stared at the ledger, at the neat lines of ownership. Then, very carefully, he looked up and let his face go blank. Let his shoulders lower. Let them believe he was bending. Crane watched, pleased. Gideon said quietly, If I'm going underground, I want to see him first. Rourke laughed. Hear that? Begging already. Gideon ignored him, eyes on Crane. You want control? Fine. Let me see the boy. 1 minute. Then I go wherever you say. Crane considered, fingers tapping the desk once. He liked bargains that felt like victories. Finally he nodded. Bring the boy. Rourke hesitated just a fraction, too small for most men to notice. But Gideon noticed, and that hesitation told Gideon something else was happening with Tommy right now. Rourke recovered and jerked his chin at a guard. Go. The guard left. Crane stepped back satisfied and started turning pages again, like this was just business. Gideon sat still, rope biting his wrists, face empty, mind moving. If Tommy came into this room, Gideon would have seconds, 1 move, maybe 2. And when the door opened a moment later, it wasn't a guard who returned first. It was a miner, older, shoulders bent, face half hidden by a scarf, who stepped into the office carrying a lantern. Crane didn't look up. Where's the boy? The miner lifted his head. In the lamplight, Gideon saw the eyes. The same eyes that used to laugh beside him in a world before the mine. Rowan Kellen's eyes. Alive. And Rowan spoke in a voice that sounded like stone dragged over stone. Little brother. Rowan stood there like a ghost that had decided it wasn't finished. His shoulders were narrower than Gideon remembered, his beard gone patchy and gray at the edges, eyes sunk deep in a face carved by years of dust and hunger. But the eyes were his. The same steady look that used to meet Gideon's across a campfire, across a fence line, across any trouble they walked into together. Gideon didn't move. If he moved too fast, if he showed anything, Rourke would read it and Crane would tighten the chain. So Gideon kept his face blank and let his heart slam against his ribs in silence. Crane finally lifted his gaze, annoyed at being interrupted by something that wasn't his choice. Why are you in here? Crane asked the miner. Rowan didn't look at Crane. His eyes stayed on Gideon. You wanted the boy brought. I brought word instead. Crane's mouth tightened. Word. Rowan nodded slightly, almost like a bow. He's not coming. The room went still. Even the lamp flame looked smaller. Rourke's hand drifted toward the revolver at his hip. Watch your mouth. Rowan's eyes slid to Rourke, just for a breath. Gideon saw something there, not fear, not even anger. A dead, patient contempt. Crane leaned back in his chair, studying Rowan now the way he studied ledgers. You're one of mine, Crane said. You'll speak when spoken to. Rowan's gaze returned to Gideon. You recognize me, don't you? Gideon forced his voice out, low and even. Rowan. Rourke jerked his head toward Crane, pleased. Told you he's got history, sir. Crane's expression sharpened, calculating in an instant. He looked at Gideon, then at Rowan, then at the ledger like it might whisper what to do next. So, Crane said slowly, this is the brother. Rowan stepped 1 pace into the room. The lantern in his hand swung, throwing shadows across the walls like bars. You put your mark on me, Rowan said. You put it on him too. Crane smiled faintly. I run a mine. Men work. Debts get paid. Rowan's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You didn't just work us. You buried us. Crane's eyes cooled. Rourke, remove him. Rourke took one step forward. Rowan didn't flinch. Instead, he reached up and pulled the scarf down from his mouth. Gideon saw it, what the scarf had been hiding. Not a cough, not a bruise. A line of raw skin across Rowan's throat, like someone had tried to stop him from speaking and failed. Rowan spoke anyway, voice rough. You remember Ma, Gideon? Gideon's jaw tightened. Don't. Rowan ignored him. She used to say a man can live through anything if he knows who he's living for. Crane's patience snapped. Enough of this. Rourke. Rowan turned his head slightly toward Crane, finally acknowledging him. You think you own the boy because you branded his hand, Rowan said, but you don't own what's inside him. Crane's eyes narrowed. You're in no position to preach. Rowan's gaze slid back to Gideon. He's hurt. Gideon's breath held. How hurt? Rowan's face twitched. Pain, shame, rage all in one tight motion. Bad enough that he couldn't stand when they tried to move him. Gideon's hands curled against the rope. Where is he? Rowan didn't answer. He looked at Crane again, and his voice turned to stone. You wanted leverage. You got it. But you pushed too hard. Crane stood slowly, the air around him turning sharp. You're telling me my property is refusing? Rowan's eyes didn't drop. I'm telling you you've got a problem in your yard. Crane smiled, thin and dangerous. You're the problem. Rowan's mouth tightened. Maybe. But I ain't the only one. He lifted his lantern slightly, just enough to throw light toward the office door. And that's when Gideon noticed what he'd missed in the shock. The door wasn't fully shut. It was latched, but not seated, as if someone had closed it quietly in a hurry. Crane followed Gideon's gaze and stiffened a fraction. Rourke spun, hand snapping to his holster. Gideon's pulse went cold and clear. A door left wrong was either carelessness, unlikely in Crane's office, or a message. Rowan spoke again, very softly, aimed at Gideon alone. When you asked to see the boy, you gave them a reason to bring me here. Gideon's throat tightened. Why would they bring you? Rowan's eyes flicked toward the ledger on Crane's desk. Because I'm the only one who knows where the pages are. Crane's head snapped up. What pages? Rowan didn't answer him. He didn't have to. Crane's gaze dropped to the open ledger, to the place where a few pages at the back looked thicker, like something had been glued in, like something had been removed before and put back wrong. Crane's face went very still. Then he moved fast, snatching the ledger, flipping pages with sharp, furious precision. Rourke was at his shoulder instantly. Sir? Crane's fingers stopped. His eyes narrowed. His breathing changed. A section was missing. Not a single page. A whole chunk, torn out clean. Crane's voice came out low and flat. Where is it? Rowan smiled without humor. You finally asking the right question. Crane's hand slammed the ledger down so hard, the lamp glass rattled. Where? Rowan didn't answer. He took one step closer to Gideon instead, lantern swinging. And with that step, Gideon saw the second thing he'd missed. Rowan's left wrist was cuffed, not to a chain, to nothing. The cuff was open. Rowan had come in here wearing a loose shackle like a disguise. Gideon's mind clicked into place. Rowan hadn't been sent. Rowan had walked in. Crane noticed too. His eyes flashed. Rourke, shoot him. Rourke drew. Gideon moved first. He surged up from the chair, rope still on his wrists, and drove his shoulder into Rourke's chest. The gun went off into the ceiling, splintering wood and showering dust. The room exploded. Guards shouted. Boots scraped. Crane stepped back hard, reaching for a pistol in the desk drawer. Rowan swung the lantern like a club, smashing it into the nearest guard's face. Glass burst. Flame spilled. The guard went down screaming, hands at his eyes. Smoke and hot oil filled the air. Gideon grabbed Rourke's gun arm with both bound hands and twisted. Rope bit his skin. Rourke snarled and punched Gideon in the ribs. Gideon didn't let go. He slammed Rourke's wrist into the desk edge, once, twice, until the pistol clattered to the floor. Crane had his pistol up now, aiming at Gideon's chest. Stop! Gideon dove sideways, knocking over the chair as a shot cracked. The bullet punched into the wall where Gideon's head had been. Rowan grabbed the ledger off the desk. Crane screamed, losing control for the first time. That's mine! Rowan shoved the ledger into Gideon's chest. Hold it! Gideon caught it by instinct, its weight solid and real. Rourke lunged again, reaching for the branding iron that hung on his belt like a favorite tool. Gideon met him with the ledger, swinging it like a brick. The blow caught Rourke across the jaw. Teeth clicked. Rourke staggered back, stunned. Rowan seized Gideon's bound wrists and pulled a small blade from his own boot. Thin, crude, but sharp. He sawed through the rope fast. "Where's Tommy?" Gideon rasped. Rowan's eyes flashed. "Shaft 2, old intake tunnel. They moved the kids when you ran." "Kids," Gideon repeated, chest tightening. "More than Tommy." Rowan nodded once. "Too damn many." Crane fired again. The shot tore through the desk drawer, spraying splinters. Gideon grabbed the pistol off the floor, the one he'd knocked from Rourke, and fired back, not at Crane, but at the lamp on the wall. Darkness slammed down again, swallowing the office. Rowan grabbed Gideon's sleeve. "Now." They crashed through the half-latched door into the hallway as guards scrambled, blinded by smoke and sudden dark. Gideon heard men shouting outside, boots pounding toward the office. They sprinted down the porch steps into the cold night. The mine yard was lit in patches, lanterns moving like nervous insects. Gideon and Rowan cut through shadow between buildings, bodies low, moving like they'd learned to move underground. Gideon clutched the ledger to his chest as if it was a living thing. "Where are the missing pages?" Gideon hissed as they ran. Rowan didn't slow. "Not here." "Where then?" Rowan glanced over his shoulder, eyes wild. "I hid 'em where Crane can't burn 'em." Gideon's breath tore in and out. "Where?" Rowan's voice dropped to a whisper even while they ran, like the mine itself could hear. "Inside the mine." A whistle shrieked behind them. Alarm. Lanterns swung their way. Shouts rose. "Stop them!" Gideon and Rowan hit the edge of the yard where the ground dropped toward the intake tunnels, black mouths cut into rock. Rowan pointed. "That one." They plunged into the darkness together, swallowed by the earth, while behind them, Crane's men flooded the yard with light and rifles. And somewhere deep ahead, beyond the sound of boots and alarms, Gideon heard it, faint, broken, unmistakable, a child coughing in the dark. The tunnel swallowed them fast, one step from the yard, and the air turned colder, thicker, wet with mineral smell. The sounds of the camp, shouting, lanterns clinking, the alarm whistle, fell behind, like the world above was already closing. Rowan didn't need a lantern. He moved by feel, palm on the rock wall, boots finding the sure places. Gideon followed close, ledger tucked under his arm, one hand on the pistol he'd taken from Rourke. His breathing sounded too loud in the dark. "Keep low," Rowan murmured. "Sound carries." Ahead, the tunnel split. One branch dipped steep, the other ran flatter but narrower. Rowan pointed without slowing. "Left," Gideon followed. The ground turned slick. Water dripped somewhere, steady as a clock. The smell of coal dust hit Gideon like a memory with teeth. Same taste, same burn at the back of the throat. "Where's Shaft 2?" Gideon whispered. Rowan didn't look back. "You'll hear it before you see it." Gideon listened harder. At first, nothing but their boots and water. Then, faint, rhythmic metal, chains, not heavy like ore carts, lighter, the sound of something being dragged, then the cough again, thin, dry, child small. Gideon's jaw clenched. He forced himself not to run. Running would make noise. Noise would pull men like wolves. Behind them, the mine woke up. A shout echoed down the tunnel mouth. "In here! They went in!" Boots started hitting wood supports above, a fast, angry drum. Rowan hissed, "They'll bring lamps, they'll bring guns. If they bring gas lamps, don't shoot." "I know," Gideon cut in, though he didn't. Not fully, not anymore. But he'd learn fast if he had to. The tunnel narrowed until Gideon had to turn his shoulders sideways. The ceiling dropped, low enough to scrape hair. Rowan moved like he'd been built for it, body folding without thought. They reached a timbered section where the supports looked old, wood dark with age, bolts rusted. A side passage opened there, half hidden by a hanging tarp. Rowan pulled the tarp aside and slipped through. Gideon followed, and the space beyond widened into a low chamber carved rough, used for storing tools once. Now it held something else. A cluster of children huddled together in the dark, knees to chest, faces turned toward the sound of footsteps like hunted animals. A few of them flinched when Gideon entered. One little girl pressed her face into another boy's shoulder and made no sound at all. Gideon's chest tightened. Rowan whispered, "Don't speak loud. They'll hear." Gideon scanned the chamber fast. He saw small hands, small shoulders, bandages, bruises, eyes that didn't match the faces, too old, too empty. And then he saw Tommy. Tommy was sitting against the wall, head lolling, skin pale under the grime. The gag was gone, but his lips were swollen. His bandaged arm hung wrong, stiff and awkward like it hurt to breathe. His right hand, branded, was clenched tight against his chest as if he could crush the mark out of himself. Gideon dropped to a knee in front of him. "Tommy?" Tommy's eyes opened slow, unfocused at first. Then they locked on Gideon's face, and something like disbelief flickered. He whispered, hoarse, "You came?" Gideon swallowed hard. "I'm here." Tommy's breath hitched into a cough that bent him forward. Gideon steadied him with one hand, careful of the wound. Rowan moved among the other children, touching shoulders, murmuring names. Some leaned into his hand like they knew him. Others stared like they didn't remember what kindness felt like. "How many?" Gideon asked, voice low. Rowan didn't look up. 23 in this pocket, more deeper. They moved him around when you ran. Keeps them from finding each other." Gideon's teeth ground. "Can they walk?" Rowan's face tightened. "Some. Not all." A sound echoed from the tunnel they'd come through. Boots, closer now, and the bobbing glow of lantern light beginning to seep around corners. Rowan's head snapped up. "Lamps." Gideon's pulse spiked. "We can't move 23 kids past armed men." Rowan's voice dropped to a whisper that carried weight. "Then we don't go back the way we came." He pointed to the far side of the chamber where a narrow opening yawned, blacker than the rest. "That's the old intake," Rowan said. "It breathes out behind the slag ridge. If we get them through it, they come out under the trees." Gideon looked at it. The opening was low and tight, barely big enough for a grown man on hands and knees. Tommy stared at it too and swallowed. I went through there once," he whispered. "They said it collapses." Rowan's eyes hardened. "Everything collapses if Crane wants it to." Lantern light brightened in the tunnel mouth. A man's voice echoed, sharp. "They're in here somewhere. Search every pocket." Children began to tremble, sensing the sound like animals sensing thunder. Gideon leaned close to Tommy. "Can you crawl?" Tommy nodded weakly. "If I have to?" "You do," Gideon said. Rowan moved to the children and raised a hand, steady, commanding in a way only a man who'd lived under orders could be. "Listen," he whispered. "No crying, no talking. You follow me single file. You hold the belt of the person in front of you. If you lose them, you stop and you don't move." A boy with hollow cheeks shook his head, eyes wild. Rowan grabbed his chin gently. "They won't, if you do what I say." The boy swallowed and nodded, trembling. Gideon tucked the ledger into his coat, tight to his body. He couldn't lose it. Not now. Not after seeing those faces. Rowan's eyes flicked to it. "You got it?" Gideon nodded. "And the missing pages?" Rowan tapped the rock wall near the intake opening. "In a crack behind a loose stone. I put 'em there months ago. If we die, at least the mind doesn't get to keep its lies." The boots in the main tunnel got louder. Shadows danced on the chamber wall, lanterns close enough now that the men were about to round the tarp. Rowan motioned. "Go." Gideon took Tommy first. He lifted him gently, guiding him toward the intake. Tommy's breath came shallow, each movement pulling pain across his face. The smallest children went next, pushed forward by the older ones, hands gripping belts, shirts, anything they could hold. They crawled on knees and palms through the narrow mouth, disappearing into the dark one by one. Rowan stayed at the chamber entrance, eyes on the tarp, listening, timing. Gideon helped Tommy into the intake and followed behind him, body scraping rock. Inside the intake, the air was worse, stale, heavy, tasting of old dust. It was a tunnel that had been abandoned for a reason. The rock above creaked faintly like it was remembering how to fall. They crawled. Tommy's breathing turned ragged. He stopped once, shoulders shaking. Gideon pressed his mouth close to Tommy's ear. "Keep moving," Tommy whispered. "I'm tired." "I know," Gideon said. "Move anyway." Behind them, the line of children crept forward, silent except for the soft scrape of cloth and skin on stone. Then, from the chamber they'd left, a shout exploded, close, sudden. "I see 'em!" Lantern light flooded the chamber behind. A gunshot cracked, deafening in the mine. Children flinched inside the intake, bodies freezing. Rowan's voice roared from behind them, not a whisper anymore. "Move!" Another shot. Then the sound of something heavy slamming into wood, Rowan kicking the tarp frame maybe, or knocking down tools to slow them. Gideon shoved Tommy forward. The boy cried out softly, pain slicing through his restraint. The intake tightened even more. Gideon's shoulders scraped raw. He could hear kids behind him beginning to whimper, tiny noises they were trying to swallow. Then came Crane's voice, echoing from the chamber, calm as poison. "Collapse it!" Gideon's blood went ice cold. He shoved forward harder, almost crawling over Tommy. "Faster!" From behind, a new sound entered the mine, metal on rock, men setting charges or pulling timbers. The mine had many ways to kill quietly. Rowan shouted again, closer now, desperate. "Gideon, keep them going!" Gideon didn't look back. He couldn't. He pushed Tommy through the narrowest pinch, then dragged him by the belt when Tommy's strength failed. The intake began to tremble, subtle at first, like a train passing far away. Then, dust sifted down from the ceiling in a sudden choking sheet. A child behind Gideon coughed, one sharp, loud cough. Another child began to sob, the sound muffled by fear and rock. The tremor grew, and through it, Rowan's voice echoed one last time from the chamber behind them, ragged, furious, pleading, "Don't you dare stop!" A thunderous crack split the darkness. The mine bucked. Rock screamed. Dust exploded forward like a living thing. Gideon threw his body over Tommy, shielding him as the intake convulsed, wood snapping somewhere behind, stone slamming down. Children screamed now, unable to hold it. Gideon felt the air shove out of his lungs as something hit the tunnel behind them with brutal force. And the world turned into darkness, dust, and a collapsing roar that swallowed every other sound. Dust packed Gideon's mouth and nose the moment the intake bucked. He clamped his lips shut, forced himself to breathe through his sleeve, and stayed curled over Tommy while the tunnel convulsed around them. Rock slammed down somewhere behind, so close the impact shook grit into his eyes. A child screamed, then choked on dust and went quiet. Gideon lifted his head an inch. He couldn't see. The air was thick, alive with powder. He blinked until his lashes stuck together. "Tommy," he rasped, a small cough under his chest, then a faint voice, broken. "I'm here." Gideon exhaled once, careful. He pushed himself up on his elbows and felt for the boy's shoulders, his ribs. Tommy was shaking but breathing. Alive. Behind them, the intake was no longer a tunnel. It was a wall. Rock, timber, dirt, everything that had been behind them was now pressed into a solid blockage. No way back. No way for Crane's men to follow. No way for Rowan either. Gideon's throat tightened until it hurt. He shoved the thought down because the kids in front of him were still moving, or trying to. "Forward," Gideon said, voice low and harsh. "Nobody stops. Keep crawling." In the darkness ahead, tiny bodies shifted, scraping stone, sobs swallowed as best they could. The line had broken in places. A girl was whimpering, her hands pawing at nothing as she lost contact with the belt in front of her. Gideon reached past Tommy, found her wrist, and pressed it onto Tommy's boot heel. "Hold that," he whispered. "Don't let go." The girl's fingers clamped like a drowning person grabbing driftwood. Gideon pushed Tommy forward inch by inch. Tommy's injured arm trembled, but he moved, teeth clenched, eyes squeezed shut against dust. The intake narrowed again, then, finally, began to slope upward. The air changed first, a faint, cooler draft, the smell of wet pine somewhere far ahead, the idea of outside. Gideon forced the line onward, whispering simple commands over and over. Hold, crawl, breathe, hold, crawl. A few minutes later, an hour later, time didn't mean anything in that dark. Tommy's hand bumped something loose. A rock shifted. A thin ribbon of colder air slipped in. Then a sliver of night sky appeared, no bigger than a coin. The children saw it and made tiny sounds, half sobs, half prayers. Gideon shoved the loose stone away, widening the gap. More night air poured in, clean enough to make his lungs sting. They were behind the slag ridge, exactly where Rowan had said. Trees overhead, black against stars. The mine camp was above and to the side, lights visible through branches like distant fireflies. If they were quiet and moved low, the ridge would hide them. One by one, the children crawled out into the open air, collapsing into grass, coughing dust into the night, eyes wide with the shock of space and sky. Tommy emerged last with Gideon's hands under his ribs. He fell onto his side and lay there, breathing hard, face turned up toward the stars like he didn't trust they were real. Gideon scanned the ridgeline. No voices, No lanterns yet. The collapse had bought them time, but Crane would figure it out fast. He'd send men around to check for other exits. He'd send dogs. Gideon's eyes found a narrow deer path leading into thicker pines. He started moving the children, not carrying them, but guiding them. Hands on shoulders, low whispers, pushing them toward the dark where trees closed in tight enough to hide a person. Eliza wasn't here. No help, no horses, just a rancher, a broken boy, and a line of children who'd never been taught to run free. Gideon kept them moving anyway. They made it 100 yards into the trees when the mine alarm changed pitch, sharper, angrier. Shouts drifted across the ridge, lanterns flared, multiplying. They'd found the collapse. "Down," Gideon whispered. The children dropped into brush, faces pressed to dirt, breath held. Gideon pulled Tommy under a low fir branch and covered the boy with his coat. Tommy's body shook violently as he fought another cough. "Don't," Gideon breathed into his ear. "Not yet." Tommy nodded, tears sliding into the dirt. Lantern light swept the ridge through the trees, distant, searching. And then, closer, a horse snorted. Gideon's pulse slowed into something cold and precise. He slid the pistol free and held it low, ready, without moving branches. Voices approached, muffled by pines. "Crane said check this side," a man muttered. "If they made it out, they'll be headed for the creek." Another answered, "He said shoot the marked ones." Gideon's jaw clenched so hard it ached. The lantern beam moved between trunks, drifting closer, closer. Then, a sudden crack of branches from the opposite direction. A deer, spooked, bolted across the slope, white tail flashing. The lantern swung after it reflexively. "Damn it," the man cursed. "Just a deer." The horse turned. Hooves receded. Gideon didn't move until the voices faded into the mine noise again. When he finally lifted his head, the children were staring at him in the dark like he was the only solid thing left in the world. Gideon whispered, "We're going." He guided them downhill toward the creek bed, using water and rock to hide tracks the way he had earlier, except now the stakes were higher than his ranch. The children moved in a silent line, some holding hands, some holding sleeves, all holding fear. At the creek, Gideon made them drink small. He tore strips from his shirt for the worst scrapes. He kept them moving even when their legs shook, even when the smallest one started to cry and an older boy slapped a hand over her mouth in panic. Gideon grabbed the older boy's wrist, firm. "No," he whispered, "we don't hurt each other, not anymore." The boy stared at him, confused by the idea, then nodded. Dawn came thin and gray through the pines. The mine lights behind them grew faint, swallowed by distance. The land opened into rolling scrub. And then Gideon saw it. The low line of his fence in the far distance, and beyond it, his cottonwoods, his cabin roof, his barn. Home. The children didn't understand what they were seeing, but Gideon did. It wasn't safety, not yet. Crane would ride, Hollis would ride, Rourke would ride. But it was a place with walls, with water, with time enough to make the next move. They reached the ranch by mid-morning, a ragged file of dust and bruises. Gideon pushed them into the barn first, into the loft, into stalls, anywhere hidden. He put them where no lantern sweep from the road would catch a small face. Then he went to his cabin, hands shaking from exhaustion he couldn't afford, and pulled the ledger from his coat. He flipped to the missing chunk. The torn edges stared back at him like an insult. Rowan had been right. Crane could burn a book, but Rowan had also said there were pages hidden inside the mine. Gideon stared at the ledger until his eyes blurred, then shut it hard. He didn't have the pages, but he did have something else. He had 23 children Crane would never admit existed, and he had a doctor in town who had watched them drag a boy away. Gideon left the barn, walked to the water trough, and rinsed coal dust off his hands until the water ran black. Under the grime, the old brand on his palm stared up at him, faded but unmistakable. He pulled his glove back on. Then he went to the loft where Tommy sat apart from the others, back against a beam, face pale, arm bandaged, eyes fixed on nothing. Gideon crouched in front of him. "You're safe right now." Tommy swallowed. "Rowan, my dad, Gideon's throat tightened so hard he couldn't speak for a moment. He forced air in. "He got you out." Tommy's eyes filled. "Is he?" Gideon didn't lie. He didn't soften it. He just said, "He stayed behind." Tommy's shoulders shook. The sound he made was small, strangled, like he was trying not to break in front of the other kids. Gideon put one hand on the boy's shoulder, heavy, steady, not comfort the way Eliza would give it, something rougher, a promise you could build on. Tommy looked up, eyes red. "They'll come," Gideon nodded. "Yes." Tommy's voice trembled. "Then what?" Gideon stood. He looked out through the barn slats toward the road, toward town, toward the hills where the mine sat like a black wound. "We make them come in daylight," Gideon said. He walked out of the barn, crossed the yard, and went into his cabin. He took a piece of paper, dipped his pen, and wrote 2 lines, short, plain. Then he folded it, put it in an envelope, and addressed it to the only name that could burn Crane without asking Hollis for permission. U.S. Marshal. He didn't have proof yet, not the pages, not the signatures, but he had bodies, living ones, and scars, and a ledger that showed the shape of the lie. And he had one more thing. He had a boy with a brand on his hand who could point to the mine and say, "There, that's where they kept us." Gideon stepped outside again. In the distance, a faint dust line rose on the road from town, riders coming, fast. Gideon watched the dust, measured it, then turned and went back to the barn. He slid the bolt into place. Inside, the children looked up at him, fear rising again. Gideon didn't give them speeches. He didn't give them hope in fancy words. He just moved to the corner where the rifles were stored, checked the ammunition, and set the first gun within reach. Then he looked at Tommy and said, quiet and final, "You're not going back to the mine."